eyes, delicate facial features, and long eyelashes that gave her look a mysterious charm. The man with the cane standing over her noted with disappointment that unlike her twin brother, the noblewoman had never been able to awaken the power of water within herself. A voice full of cold indifference announced that a terrible fate awaited the girl, death, and among the crowd of noble persons, the young man stood with his head bowed, and deep sorrow was frozen in his gloomy gaze. He was irresistible, full of noble grandeur, and at the same time remained the brother of that very aristocrat who was now being led to certain death. But not a drop of sadness was reflected in his impeccably calm features. Water ran down the girl's face, mixing with the raindrops, and it was impossible to tell whether these were tears of despair or just cold moisture brought by the wind. Her name was Liarte Elheim, and she remained the only one in her great line who never managed to awaken the magic of water, becoming a sad exception among those whose blood carried the ancient gift. The elderly aristocrat, whose face remained impassive, as if carved from stone, looked at her coldly, and without showing an ounce of regret, calmly gave the order to begin the ritual, as if her fate had already been sealed. The magicians surrounding the shining seal, in the center of which was the girl, raised their hands, and at the same moment, the air was filled with enchanting streams of energy, flashing with a dazzling blue light, like a crystal of the purest water. Liarte Elheim couldn't hold back her tears, but at that very moment, magic began to swirl around her, shimmering, shining, and enveloping her in a thin veil, as if responding to her despair. It was the power of a magical crystal that hung in the air, pulsating with bright light, like a living being, giving all its power into the hands of the one who was ready to receive it. The nobleman standing nearby recoiled in shock, not believing his eyes, because before him was revealed the most ancient spirit awakened from a long sleep. Its power began to manifest right at that moment, like a force that no one dared to disturb. Liarte's twin brother was deeply shocked that his younger sister was able to awaken her power in such a desperate and hopeless moment, when it seemed like the whole world around them had collapsed, and everything was already lost forever. The magic stone, as if unable to withstand the stress, began to crack and break, blinding light bursting out of its cracks, illuminating the darkness around, and filling the air with ancient magic. The sorcerers who performed the ritual could not believe their eyes, as the incredible power they had barely contained broke through their defenses, leaving them confused and struggling to contain the flow of magic that threatened to engulf everything around them. At the most critical moment, when it seemed that all efforts were in vain, the crystal, unable to withstand the stress, cracked, and from its fragments the spirit of water burst forth with a deafening roar, its powerful presence enveloping everything around. The beauty standing in the center of this magical whirlwind, as if she was underwater, was plunging into an unusual state. And at that moment, the hearing was struck by a strange voice, which, as if coming from the depths of the water itself, began to speak, causing the heart to clench with anxiety. The stranger, holding her gaze, ordered the lady to open her eyes, and despite her weakness, she obeyed, submitting to his request, as if his voice were the only source of light in this darkness, illuminating the path in her dark world. In front of her stood a water spirit incarnated in the form of a young man whose hair flowed like water, and who anxiously asked for something important. But his words were unclear, and the girl could not understand what he was talking about, sensing his obvious concern. Liarte Elheim woke up from a terrible dream. Her breathing heavy and her eyes wide open, she felt her body shaking with fear, as if she still couldn't leave the darkness of her nightmare. Around her was a modest room, with a dim lantern hanging on the wall, and a roof made of wooden beams, which gave the place an atmosphere of secluded silence and a sense of abandonment. The noblewoman, shocked by the sudden situation, sat up on the bed, her heart beating faster, and her mind was racing, trying to understand whether this was just a nightmare or whether everything that was happening was a reality in which she found herself at the most unexpected moment. Suddenly, a hand quietly and confidently leaned against the door, and the guest, looking around the dark corridor, cautiously asked if he could go into his sister's chambers to find out how she was feeling. It was her brother, who, without any emotion on his face, indifferently addressed her with a question about her well-being, as if every word had been carefully thought out and devoid of personal attachment. The man sitting down next to his sister calmly explained that he simply wanted to check on her, to make sure she was okay, without a hint of worry or other feelings in his gaze, as if it was a normal thing. Suddenly, with inexorable force, a man's hand grabbed the lady's wrist, and she froze, unable to understand what was happening, feeling how a cold alarm engulfed her, and the space around her contracted. In a rude tone and with obvious irritation, Leonricius said that, because of his sister, all his carefully thought-out plans had gone down the drain, and now he found himself on the verge of despair, completely deprived of the ability to control the situation. The boy looked mad, as he said with fury in his eyes, how much this relative irritated him. He hated her with all his being, and his words sounded as if they were bursting out, unable to be restrained. The lady recoiled in surprise, her eyes wide with fear, and with a trembling voice asked again what exactly her brother meant, unable to believe what was happening, as if his words were not from this world. 3 years ago, the noblewoman, despite her fragility, saved her brother, taking the blow from hired killers, covering him with her body, risking her life for him, and with this act proving her incredible loyalty. Then the beauty was wounded, and the cousin had to put all his plans aside to treat his sister, forgetting about his own ambitions and even his own well-being, giving everything for her recovery and salvation. Frowning, Liarte Elheim realized with alarm that she had probably somehow ended up in the past, and now everything around her looked strangely familiar, as if she had returned to a moment when everything still seemed real, but was no longer so. Without thinking twice, the aristocrat, with unexpected determination, knocked the impudent man's hand away, abruptly breaking free from his grip and regaining her independence, despite the anxiety that raged inside. Liarte, with obvious irritation in her voice, rudely ordered her relative not to worry about her anymore, because she was no longer going to act recklessly and risk her own safety for the sake of others' interests, realizing her responsibility. For the guy, this behavior of the lady was a real shock, and in surprise, he asked her what she was talking about, not understanding what could have prompted her to change her behavior and statements so abruptly. Suddenly, in complete silence, the door slammed shut with a bang, as if the answer to all their questions, and the sound hung in the air like a harbinger of something important and inevitable. A nobleman entered his presence, felt like something important and powerful, and he ordered the young nobleman to follow him immediately, leaving no time for objections or reflection, as if everything had been decided in advance. The boy's father had brought people with him who had special abilities, and the water spirit stone reacted in a strange and unexpected way, as if it had felt the true power of these individuals for the first time, awakening a vague anxiety in the air. Without thinking twice, the aristocrat, leaving his sister sitting on the bed, stood up from his place, resolutely following the nobleman, his face expressing complete determination and no hesitation, as if he had already made his decision. Before leaving, the man with blonde hair and distinct blue eyes looked at Liarte with disdain, his gaze filled with arrogance and cold condemnation, as if she was not worthy of his attention. The lady, however, did not look away, meeting his cold gaze with the same motionless expression, and responded in kind. Her eyes did not express fear, only confidence that her place was here, and no one had the right to judge her. In the future, when the stone split, the lady felt a strange sensation, as if something had taken up residence inside her body, breaking into her essence, and awakening an unknown power that she had never realized before. Perhaps it was at that moment that the maiden awakened a power that had been passed down through generations of her family, ancient and hidden in her blood. She felt it slowly awakening within her, filling her with power, ready to act like an ancient energy waiting for its time. Clenching her hand into a fist, the woman felt her energy merging into one stream, as if her entire essence had gathered in this gesture, as if she was ready to let go of everything that had accumulated in the female soul. Raising her palms into the air, Liarte began to concentrate on trying to use her power, feeling how every cell in her body responded to this impulse, how nature itself began to respond to her inner call. A soft, almost imperceptible glow appeared in her fingers, which soon began to intensify, and drops of water invisible to the eye began to gather in the air, forming small circles as if obeying her will. The magic quickly began to transform into a compact ball, sparkling with a soft light, and feeling like something alive, as if the element of water itself had taken on a form that could respond to its every impulse and movement. Liarte smiled happily when she realized that she had finally succeeded, and her power, despite all her doubts, took shape and began to obey her will. This was a real achievement for her, confirmation that she was capable of more. The beauty didn't know if it was a curse or a blessing, but her determination was clear. She was determined to leave her family's duchy without looking back to find her own way and free herself from everything that kept her here. Her big eyes, full of determination and stubbornness, did not express the slightest doubt. They were hard as stone, ready to overcome any obstacles despite the unknown that awaited her ahead. The horse-drawn carriage glided through the forest as if nature itself was making way for this journey. There was a soft rustling in the air, as if everything around sensed that this was the beginning of a new journey for Liart, full of unknown horizons and hidden challenges. To his companion's question, the young gentleman, whose eyes were covered with a red ribbon, calmly replied that he was fine without expressing the slightest worry, despite the strange situation he found himself in. The knight noticed with a slight smile that Elheim had already guessed who could have sent assassins to kill the heir of their family, and curiously asked the master if he thought that the curse that had been weighing on him all this time would be lifted. The man shrugged his shoulders, as if it was not that important, and explained that they did not have many options since only a water awakened could lift the spell from him, and they could only hope for this rare specialist. The guard smiled and said with slight sarcasm that the imperial family had sent him a gift, to which the gentleman, holding back his irritation, replied that his comrade should immediately return the item back, without delaying his reaction to this unexpected gesture. Behind the carriage, with silent determination, followed quietly the discerning guards ready to attack at any moment, if it turned out to be necessary, their eyes reflecting their readiness to protect their master at any cost. The young master was willing to give everything he had, if only someone could lift the curse from him, and this thought was the only desire that mattered to him at that moment, encompassing him entirely. With the help of dark energy, the boy stopped the intruders, and their cries of pain broke the silence, as the power emanating from him suppressed them for a moment, as if the dark magic itself seemed alive and persistent. Taking off the blindfold, the boy revealed to the world his red eyes empty and lifeless, as if he saw nothing but pain and loss, and with a cold expression, he stated that the motto of their Birch family had always been to defeat all their enemies, no matter the cost. The castle, standing against the backdrop of the sunset sky, looked strange, and at the same time majestic with crooked architecture, as if its creators were trying to personify their own imperfection. And next to it, there was a large house that seemed like a stone embodiment of strength. The man sitting in the chair looked up and asked curiously what brought a man named Mikael Bircha to this place, his words sounding like a riddle that hid something more than simple curiosity. The nobleman, whose eyes were covered with a ribbon, said with a slight smile that he had come here with one request. His voice was quiet but full of confidence, as if every word had been carefully weighed. Leaning his hand boredly on the arm of the chair, the aristocrat offered to send him away if his presence was undesirable, without showing any concern, as if the very fact of his arrival should not have caused any particular emotion. However, the handsome man had an official invitation in his hands, which, despite his relaxed posture, served as irrefutable proof of his right to be present, like an invisible wall that no one could simply destroy. And so the nobleman, on the contrary, could not utter a word against it, knowing that any protest against the presence of this man would be useless, since his position was supported by the force of authority that could not be challenged. This document, signed by the emperor himself and the representatives of the temple, was irrefutable proof that the guest who came here had a special right, and no one could question his intentions, for he was protected by the highest authority. Sly as a fox, Mikkel said, with a slight grin that he seemed to be feared his words were full of irony, but they concealed a deep conviction that his presence here left no choice for others. The gray-haired nobleman, without wasting any time, ordered the aristocrat opposite to say directly what he wanted, without complicating the situation with unnecessary words. For in this matter, there was no room for riddles or evasions. Mikael, shaking his head slightly, explained that he had gone completely blind, and that even the holy powers could not remove the curse that hung over him, like a dark shadow condemning him to eternal suffering. The man, feeling hopeless, decided to ask for help from the one awakened by water, because only he could remove the spell cast by the dark forces, and only he had the power to break this curse and restore his sight. The old man, with a wise look, explained that it would be extremely difficult for the caster to remove such a powerful curse, and therefore it was necessary to give him the right to choose, to give him a chance to decide for himself what to do, for only he himself could understand the full depth of this test. Raising his finger up, the man slyly said that Birchie had to give him 1 month for a volunteer to appear who was willing to remove the curse, because that was the only way to remove the power contained in this spell. The guy gripped the armrests of the chair, thinking hard, and despite his doubts, he still agreed, realizing that this was his only chance, and the time for thinking was limited. The house they were in was built in a unique architecture. The stone walls reflected the sunset light, creating an atmosphere of inexorable time, which continued its course regardless of what was happening inside. The footsteps of their feet echoed on the stone floor, each sound resonating in the void, breaking the silence and bouncing off the cold, smooth tiles, as if reminding them of the timelessness of this place where every movement was part of something greater. The knight walked behind his master, his steps blending into the silence, and finally he decided to ask a question. Did Elheim promise to lift the curse from him? Because everything that happened next depended on it, and every word could change their fate. The nobleman got into the carriage standing near the house and admitted with a heavy sigh that he had always doubted the existence of someone who could remove the spell from him, since the forces that had cast it were too powerful for a mere mortal. At this time, Liarte, sitting by the window, looked out onto the street, her gaze thoughtful and penetrating, as if she was trying to find answers to her own questions, exploring the world behind the glass with curiosity and interest. The guard standing at the door looked around, his gaze piercing the space, and he noticed that not even an ant was visible in the area, creating a feeling of strange silence and emptiness, as if the world had frozen for a moment. After that, the guy asked the man standing next to him with a smile whether he was going to continue staying there, or perhaps his presence had become unnecessary, as if checking if it was time for the next step on their journey. Young Bircha, sitting on the bench, explained that Elheim was supposed to gather all the awakened in one place, and he hoped that among them would be the one person who could help him lift the curse and free him from pain. Mikkel chuckled and said that this was exactly the reason why he should visit Elheim, and that he should use every chance to end up where the answers to his questions were possible. With a wave of his hand, the man turned to Valto and ordered him to go to the duchy, gather all the information about Count Elheim, so that they could understand what exactly was behind his intentions and what secrets might be hidden in his family. With a smirk, the knight bowed and obeyed his master's command, his movements confident and quick, as if each action was part of a long-rehearsed ritual that he performed without further ado. Mikhail was left alone, sitting on a soft sofa in a luxurious room where the furniture was expensive and made with exquisite taste, creating an atmosphere of wealth and well-being in which he seemed to be able to drown, if not for his restless mind. The boy found it difficult to control his ability, being completely blind, feeling the power inside him begin to manifest, and despite all his determination, it still left him with a feeling of uneasiness, as if he was on the verge of losing control. The young man stood up from his seat. His gaze was directed into nothing, not fixating on any object, but it seemed to him that there was an invasion, as if something or someone had disturbed the peace of this place, but he could not say exactly what. The lady in the white cloak, hiding around the corner, flinched as her presence was revealed. Her face, previously hidden in shadow, now becoming clear to the boy's eyes, and a look of anxious concern flashed in her eyes. Dark energy began to form in the guy's hand. It manipulated, wriggled like a living creature, ready to break out and fulfill its will, filling the space around him with a strange aura of tension and anticipation. The noblewoman quietly said that she was not the murderer, nor was she the water awakened sent by Lord Elheim. Her words were calm, but there was a hidden worry in them, as if she was trying to figure out how his words would affect the situation. The guy froze in shock when he realized that the stranger was not emitting the stinking smell of water that he expected, but a clean and pleasant aroma, like from a spring, fresh and invigorating, which immediately confused him and made him doubt his expectations. The lady stood awkwardly in the room, not knowing what to do next. Her gaze darted around the room, trying to find at least some trace or answer, to understand how to behave in this unpredictable moment, but her thoughts could not be collected into one whole. Birch, unable to resist, asked the stranger why she had come to him. His voice was calm, but his eyes showed wariness, like a person who is ready to meet any surprise, but does not want to show his emotions. The noblewoman suddenly declared that she could help the man remove his curse. Her words were decisive, but there was no extra confidence in them, as if she herself did not know what would happen exactly if she took this step. In response, she also asked if she could restore his sight, what he was willing to do for her in return. Her voice sounded sincere, but in his intonation there was a thin thread of doubt, expecting a reaction from the man. Smiling slyly, he tenderly kissed the lady's palm and confidently declared that he was ready to do anything for her. His words sounded as if he was offering all his heart and strength, ready to fulfill any of her whims. The guy leaned closer to his night guest and promised that he would give her everything she wanted. His voice was soft, but there was a determination in it, like a man who was ready to do anything to fulfill her desires. Liarte stood up, standing resolutely in front of the handsome guy, and firmly stated that she first needed to assess his physical condition. Her gaze was serious and purposeful, as if she did not allow herself to miss. Reaching her hand forward, she quietly but confidently said that she wanted to remove the blindfold from the nobleman's eyes. Her movements were precise, as if honed over the years, smooth and confident, and her voice sounded as if she knew exactly what she was doing and why, without doubting her actions. Slowly, she began to untie the ribbon from the man's head, her fingers carefully touching the fabric, trying to gently remove the bandage, to see his face for the first time. And with each movement, the tension in the air grew, creating the feeling that time had stopped. The maiden did this for a long time, explaining that the knots on the fabric were too tight. Her hands moved carefully but decisively, as if each movement required time and patience so as not to damage the fabric and not rush the result. The guy could have said that he could have untied the knot himself, but for some reason he didn't voice it, leaving silence between them, as if his thoughts were distracted by something more than a simple action that he could perform himself. He enjoyed the gentle touch of the lady's hands, and this feeling penetrated him like a thin stream of warmth, creating a strange sensation that her every movement left a mark on his soul that was not so easy to erase. Finally, the ribbon fell, and the boy looked at the girl opposite, with his empty, blind eyes, in which there was not a hint of light. His gaze was cold and lifeless, as if he no longer existed in this world, but only existed in the dark abyss that enveloped him. His eyes were red and dangerous, like a predator's, and their gaze pierced her through and through, leaving the feeling that she was standing on the brink of something terrible, where every second could be her last, and the air around her was filled with tension and a silent harbinger of trouble. Inside them, in their pupils, there was a darkness hidden like the curse of strong chains that could not be broken, a black energy that filled the male soul, ready to break out at any moment and engulf everything around. The lady froze in shock, not believing her eyes, because it was terribly strange, terrible and unimaginable, as if the whole world around them was disappearing, leaving only this darkness that could swallow up everything she knew. The man had been cursed with dark magic, and by all appearances, its effects were deadly. The dark forces that bound him were leading to inevitable death, and she felt how this curse was squeezing his soul more and more. It was different from a normal curse, and the 7 seals that surrounded the magic only increased its impact, turning the magic into something more dangerous, which became more powerful and uncontrollable with each passing moment. Bircha asked how the man from the Elheim family could know about such a thing. His voice sounded wary, and his eyes were puzzled. He didn't expect that anyone in this world would be aware of something so dark and forbidden. The noblewoman shrugged her shoulders, as if unable to change the course of events, and quietly explained that this was how it all happened. The words were restrained, but there was a hidden pain in them, carefully hidden behind an external calm, as if she had already resigned herself to what could not be changed. The truth was that she had read forbidden books in the past, when she still hoped to receive love from her family, and that was her mistake, which she could no longer correct, but she could not give up on this dream of acceptance and recognition. The beauty explained that if treatment was not started now, the man could lose his sight forever. Her voice was full of determination, but at the same time, there was a slight anxiety in it. She understood how important every moment was. Putting her hand on the forehead of her interlocutor, the maiden used exciting magic. Her eyes glowed, and the energy that emanated from her filled the room, and she decided to try to remove the first seal from him, risking that it would not be without consequences. The guy seemed to be immersed in water, surprised that the lady possessed such great power. His gaze was full of bewilderment, and he felt how magic permeated his body, leaving a feeling as if everything around him had become different, bright, and unimaginable. Finally, the lady completed her ritual, and Bircha touched his face with his hand, feeling how he became lighter. His breathing became more even, and the world around him became a little clearer, although not everything was decided yet. Since it would be difficult for a man's body to withstand the removal of all the seals at once, Liarte decided to remove the curse in parts, realizing that her actions must be careful not to cause him more harm than good. Throwing a hood over her head, the girl said that she would come tomorrow and they would remove the second seal. Her words sounded confident, and there was a firmness in them that was impossible to ignore. She left him no choice but to wait. The man who was sitting on the sofa with a smile admitted that he would wait impatiently for his interlocutor to arrive. His eyes sparkled with anticipation, but inside he felt a growing anxiety. He did not know what to expect, but he could not hide his interest. The lovely Liarte said goodbye to the boy. Before leaving, stopping at the doorway, the woman's gaze focused, and there was a determination in her movements that spoke of her being completely dedicated to her goal, not allowing anything to distract her from her path. In the aristocrat's hand was the red ribbon that had been removed from his eyes, its edges still warm from his skin, and the object itself felt like a memory of what he had just experienced, like a reminder that his world would now be different. He didn't understand why the mysterious stranger somehow attracted him to her in a pleasant way, but something in her presence awakened feelings in him that he didn't know how to deal with. In a past life, half of the Elheim Duchy's territories were burned down in a terrible war, and it was all because of the cursed Birch, who was a blind madman who sought destruction without knowing what consequences his actions would bring. And all this happened because of the damned Birch, a blind madman who thirsted for destruction, not realizing that his madness could lead to a catastrophe that destroyed everything that was dear and that seemed untouchable, leaving only ashes and devastation. Then the girl's family also went crazy, grabbing her by the shoulders in a desperate attempt to find a way out, deciding that her death could awaken the power of the Waterstone, which could save their lives and restore their lost hopes. But it was Liarte, not her twin brother, who became the owner of the water crystal, which was an unexpected and fateful turn of events that changed not only her life, but the entire course of their family's history. Leonricius stood next to his relative. He was handsome and lovely, with dark hair and eyes like the deep sea, but his gaze was cold and emotionless, as if he was no longer part of the world he once knew. The man came to his sister's chambers to find out about the consequences of the recent attack, and for the sake of decency to inquire about her well-being, although in reality, his concern was only an empty formality, concealing his true intentions. The noblewoman, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear, with a barely noticeable expression of displeasure on her face, calmly asked what her brother cared about her at all, as if her life were just a toy in his hands, not deserving of his attention. The boy clenched his fist in anger, feeling his anger growing as the gentle Liarte dared to confront him without showing him due respect, and this reminder of her independence only increased his irritation. Nevertheless, the handsome man continued to portray a caring brother who, despite hidden contempt and dissatisfaction with her actions, confidently held the role, anxiously inquiring about her condition in order to maintain the appearance of an ideal family relationship. With a cold voice, the noblewoman stated that Leonricius had only acted this way because he needed her magical power, and that all his concern was just a hypocritical game hiding his true motives. The guy had no other choice but to silently leave the room, leaving her, and he stepped into the corridor, feeling how hard this act was for him. He did not have enough words to express the whole storm of emotions that engulfed him. He stood frozen in the hallway, aware that his sister's demeanor had changed abruptly. Her gaze had become cold, and her actions were more confident and decisive than ever. The abrupt change in her behavior was obvious, and it was alarming. His sister had changed after that terrible attack by the assassins who had come for her life. And now, instead of the former defenselessness, there was a determination and strength in her eyes that he had not noticed before. He clenched his teeth in anger, realizing how much time he had spent trying to control her, because before his relative had done nothing but try to please him to be obedient and attentive. But now she was completely different. Alias, a bright-eyed young man, broke the peaceful silence when his friend who came with important news reported that the water spirit's glow had greatly increased, attracting attention with its unusual strength and beauty. The boys stopped near a pedestal on which a water crystal rested under a glass cover. It was incredibly beautiful, beckoning with its deep blue light that emanated from it like the embodiment of strength and grandeur, concealing ancient and unimaginable energy. Leonritius, lost in thought, quietly asked how long the stone had been glowing so brightly, wondering if its power was something temporary or if it could actually maintain such a glow for a long time. The friend shrugged and said that the magical message emanating from the stone had shone so brightly since dawn, without ceasing its blue glow, as if it were part of the world itself, which was always full of power and light. Leonritius almost touched the crystal, wanting to feel its magical power. But to his disappointment, he realized that he felt nothing, as if all his energy and desire were being absorbed by an invisible barrier. However, to his great disappointment, he found that he felt nothing despite all his efforts. His fingers could not detect the slightest change, not a trace of the magical power that he had so hoped to feel. At this time, Liarti, dressed in a dark cloak, glided through the shadows of the night, heading towards the place of her secret meeting. In her hand, a flickering candlestick, whose dim flame barely illuminated her steps, giving the whole event an atmosphere of the unknown and hidden danger. The night was quiet and mysterious. The moon, like a silent witness, shone brightly in the sky, and the stars, like invisible observers, scattered across the black velvet of the sky, illuminating everything around with a soft, almost magical light, giving everything a special mystery. Mikhail sat on a bench, his eyes already filled with fatigue from the long wait, intently followed the darkness of the night. He was absorbed in thoughts, but still could not get rid of the excitement that was increasingly taking hold of him with every moment. The man bowed his head slightly, showing his respect, and smiling softly, greeted the girl despite the shadows of fatigue hidden in his eyes, like traces of a long journey and unbearable hard experiences. Liarte, without wasting any time, removed the hood from her head, and with a slight light in her eyes, greeted him in return, joyfully expressing how pleasant it was to meet him again, despite all the hidden tension of the situation. The aristocrat, feeling a little awkward, frowned slightly, not being particularly pleased with the way the girl addressed him so formally, and not hiding his slight irritation, suggested moving on to a more personal conversation, calling him by name. The boy froze for a moment. His face flushed, and his heart beat faster, when Liarte, without hesitation, whispered his name, as if she already knew him better than he himself expected, and he could not hide his confusion. Smiling tenderly, the beauty gently pressed her hands to the man's face, whispering to him that the time had come to remove the second seal from him, and feeling a slight touchingness in this moment, she was ready to help him in his suffering. Noticing how the man's hand was shaking from pain, the lady carefully covered it with her palm, trying to convey her strength and calm, as if to ease his suffering and return him to a sense of security in this difficult moment. She gently asked her interlocutor not to worry, assuring him that everything would be fine, and invited him to trust her, despite all the hardships of what was happening, promising to do everything to help him, no matter how the circumstances turned out. Mikhail, stunned by her words, looked up in shock when he heard her vow to return his sight, because no one but her had ever behaved so sincerely and friendly with him, as if a sincere desire to help was more important than all barriers. Magic, like an invisible force, enveloped the fragile-looking girl. The water in her hands flowed softly, creating an aura of confidence and tenderness around her, giving her magical power and calm in this difficult situation. Miko, looking at her with gratitude, smiled, and with complete confidence said that he believed her completely, feeling how her strength filled him, and how he no longer doubted her ability to fulfill her promise. Magic flowed from the lady's fingers. Drops of water floated in the air, creating a truly magical atmosphere around her, filled with lightness and grace, as if nature itself was helping her at that moment. The beauty finally removed the second seal of the curse, and then, with concern in her voice, asked about the well-being of her interlocutor. Her attention to detail was so sincere that it penetrated straight into the soul, filling him with gratitude. Mikhail, amazed by her strength and determination, explained with a smile on his face that he felt great thanks to her care, and help feeling his body filled with the vital energy that she so generously gave him. As Liarte suddenly sat down quietly next to him on the bench, her eyes filled with soft regret, and she admitted that she was afraid of hurting him, worried that her actions might not have been as careful as she wanted. The aristocrat, feeling a keen desire to finally see her with his own eyes, desperately wanted it, dreaming of the moment when he would be able to look at her, to see her face, which had remained hidden from him until now. Running his fingers through a strand of her hair, he said in a soft voice that he wanted to know her name, when she lifted the curse from him, because he felt that this moment would be important and filled with special meaning for both of them. Liarte explained with slight surprise that she had thought that he had already found out everything about her long ago, and therefore was surprised by his curiosity, but at the same time, she was glad that she could open up to him at such an important moment. Kissing her hair, Mikhail, feeling the depth of his respect for her, firmly explained that he wanted to remain a gentleman and not reveal the identity of the noblewoman if she herself did not want it, considering her desires and feelings to be the most important. There was a reason why a person who had managed to subdue the spirit of water hid his identity from others, because this secret was not only important, but also dangerous, because water magic could become a threat if someone learned of its true power. The young man, despite his curiosity, was not going to find out her secret himself. He decided to wait until the traveler herself decided to reveal her story, because he was ready to respect her personal boundaries and never invade her world without permission. Liarte, feeling such tender care from Mikhail, blushed embarrassedly, because his attention was so sincere and warm that she could not help but notice how he cared about her, even in the smallest manifestations. With the first rays of dawn, the palace was filled with a special glow. Its walls began to shine with splendor, and the air became fresh and filled, creating a feeling that everything around was ready to wake up and bring new hopes and opportunities into this world. The lady, deciding to take her brother's advice, headed to the library to find answers to her questions and learn more about the powers of water magic, seeking to understand how this power works and how it can help in her own journey. Bersha was rumored to be a terrible man, known for his cruelty, but when people came face to face with him, they discovered that he was actually a good man, honest and sincere, which greatly surprised those who had previously considered him cruel and unfair. The library was huge. The tall stained glass windows let in soft light, and it was easy to get lost among the many books and shelves, absorbed in the endless knowledge and wonders that were hidden on the shelves. Liarte missed the library because she hadn't been here for a long time, although she loved to read and immerse herself in the worlds that opened up before her on the pages of books, where she could forget about all her worries and just enjoy the silence. Once upon a time, she secretly went to buy books, hiding from the eyes of her relatives, fearing that her passion for reading would be condemned, because she knew that they did not approve of her desire for knowledge and often scolded her for it. But when the ladies were discovered in the library, she was severely punished for such behavior, because it was believed that a girl should only do what corresponded to her status and the roles prescribed by society, and not be absorbed in books and learning. Liarte slowly ran her fingertips over the spines of the old dusty books, carefully looking among the many tomes for the one that contained information about the awakened, whose element was associated with water, hoping to find answers to her questions. However, soon, another person entered the spacious, dimly lit library, whose appearance broke the silence that reigned here. The gaze immediately caught the presence of an unfamiliar lady bent over old books, as if immersed in another world. He was a modest, slightly shy young man with soft blonde hair that fell softly over his forehead. He paused at the entrance, not knowing whether to step forward or whether it would be better to remain in the shadows so as not to disturb the atmosphere of solitary searching that reigned in the library. He was wearing large glasses, and his face was covered with his hand, as if he was trying to hide his embarrassment. He addressed the beauty quietly and respectfully, avoiding her gaze, which only emphasized his awkwardness in this situation. It was Viamin Elheim, a relative of Liarte, a quiet and shy boy who always tried to remain in the shadows, preferring peace and solitude to noisy society despite the family ties. In their family, where traditions and kinship ties were especially strong, she had 3 older brothers, each of whom had his own unique character, leaving a bright mark on her life and shaping her own perception of the world. The first of them was Alias, a stately and proud man with noble blonde hair, who often looked at her from the height of his experience and age, as if reminding her of the difference between them and his right to instruct her. The second was the handsome Thundrion, with a cheeky smile and fiery red hair, whose gaze was always filled with mischief, and whose words were filled with mockery. But behind this bravado there was undeniable strength and a willingness to protect his family. And the third is the quiet Viamine, the most reserved and thoughtful of the brothers, a young man who never interfered in other people's affairs and preferred to remain on the sidelines, observing the world around him with silent calm. Since she and Liarte were almost the same age, they had a special bond, and it was with him that she most often spent time hiding in the thick bushes of the flowering garden where they could play away from prying eyes. They were both quiet and a little shy children who liked to hide in the shade of the trees, where leafing through old books they created their own little world. In these pages, they found refuge, a place where everything was understandable, only to the two of them, and where harmony and silence reigned. But one day, their quiet, trusting connection was destroyed in an instant when the young man, overcome with excitement from his discovery, unexpectedly threw his sister to the ground, wanting to show her something truly amazing, and as it seemed to him, important. It was forgotten, forbidden knowledge, hidden from prying eyes. Viamine, driven by a thirst for knowledge, began to study ancient black books, the pages of which kept truths in secret from his father. One day, he could not resist and invited his sister to join him in his study. However, the secret could not remain so forever, and soon their father, whose close attention left no chance for mistakes, revealed their secret, bursting into the room at the most inopportune moment. At that moment, the young men shuddered in horror, realizing that they had been taken by surprise. Their eyes showed fear of the inevitable punishment, and the hands that clutched the ancient tome trembled from the sudden realization that their childish prank had turned into a real catastrophe. Filled with anger, clenching his fists, their father exhaled heavily, trying to contain his raging rage, and in a menacing voice demanded an explanation, demanding to name the one who dared to steal the forbidden knowledge belonging to their family. Viamine, pale with fear, raised his palms upward, with trembling hands, as if hoping to protect himself with such a gesture from possible punishment. His lips trembled and treacherous tears rolled down his cheeks when he stammered that it was not his fault at all. Without thinking for a second, overcome with panic, the boy turned sharply to his sister, stretched out his hand, and without hesitation pointed at her, lying that it was she who was behind all this, that it was Liarte who stole the forbidden books and involved him in this dangerous business. Liarte froze, unable to believe what she had just heard. In an instant, her brother, with whom she had shared the secrets of childhood, had turned his back on her, betrayed her, lied, making her look guilty in order to escape punishment himself. The father, possessing insight and knowing his children too well, immediately realized that Viamine's words were a lie. But despite this, he still decided to punish Liarte, as if wanting to teach her a harsh lesson for her carelessness. Instead of brute force, he resorted to water magic, directing streams of icy lashing jets that crashed onto his daughter's fragile body, leaving burning marks of pain on her skin like a brand that captured her mistake. After that incident, Viamine, tormented by guilt, tried again and again to talk to his sister, hoping to regain the lost trust. But Liarte, having experienced betrayal, no longer wanted to hear his voice. No matter what the handsome young man tried to talk about, be it a trivial topic or sincere remorse, the girl invariably slipped away, avoiding his gaze, as if even the sound of his words was unbearable for her, leaving a heavy silence in the air. And now, among the shelves of the ancient library, the man once again, for the umpteenth time, tried to talk to his sister, clenching his fists, in fear that, as before, she would simply turn around and run away without even giving him a chance to say a word. He awkwardly looked away, trembling all over. He timidly asked how she was feeling. His voice was barely audible, as if on the verge of a breakdown, and he hoped that she would not notice his inner turmoil and anxiety, which were impossible to hide. The noblewoman answered him rudely and with contempt, almost as if mocking him, asking how he dared to appear before her and show his dirty and disgusting face, as if it was not worth hiding and there was no need to pretend. The young man did not expect such a sharp answer and was stunned, standing in complete bewilderment, not knowing what to say, because his reaction to her words was the complete opposite of what he imagined and how everything could be. Liarte changed a lot after she experienced death, and since then, she became a completely different person. Forgetting all her previous beliefs and values, she began to look at the world with different eyes, full of hard experience and pain. Viamine said in a plaintive voice that he was shocked and worried to learn about what had happened to his sister, but she, without paying any attention to him, only joylessly walked past, coldly declaring that she had no time for empty talk. Finally, the young man, overcome with a feeling of deep guilt, shouted that he sincerely repented for his childhood mistake, that he had always wanted to apologize to her, but had not found the time or opportunity to do so, and now, finally, he decided to confess his feelings. However, Before he could finish, the lady interrupted him sharply, uttering a firm and unbending no, as if her decision was final and nothing could change her mind, and she had long since closed the matter for herself. She turned around and glared at her brother with contempt and fury, explaining to him that he had been looking out for his own interests all these years, and that his confession was more like an attempt to get rid of guilt than real remorse. The woman's shoes suddenly stopped, and standing there, she thought that perhaps she should rethink her actions. Was she really wrong? Had she really not seen the whole picture all this time, and been wrong in her decisions, making them based on her own feelings? The beauty, with a subtle irony in her voice, began to say that Viaminde had always strived to be a good boy in the eyes of their father, despite his mistakes and weaknesses, hoping for the approval and recognition that he so badly sought in his eyes. The guy, swaying with excitement and emotion, tried to justify himself, but the words stuck in his throat, and he could not utter a single sound, realizing how hard it was to be understood when his whole life seemed to have turned upside down in one moment. Before leaving the lady without turning around, sternly added that she no longer wished to know anything about her brother, that she was completely closed to him and to everything connected with him, as if there was no past or common connection between them. The young man couldn't let her go, grabbing her wrist with such force that she didn't even expect him to dare to do such an act, trying to hold her back, despite all the coldness and indifference that she radiated towards him. Immediately, the aristocrat, with a cold look and a quick movement, slapped away the stranger's hand, feeling disgusted by the very fact of touching, as if her personal space had been violated, and it was absolutely unacceptable to her. She bit her lips with restraint and some contempt, and taking a step back indifferently, pointed out that he should continue to be that ideal boy in the eyes of others, try to remain a good child without unnecessary ambitions and claims. Viaminde stood alone, his hand outstretched forward, as if expecting his gesture to be understood and accepted. But in his eyes, there was only desperate melancholy, as if he could not find a way to understanding, left alone with this insurmountable barrier. Night fell, and the majestic towers of the mansion, like silent witnesses of these events, seemed even more gloomy and ominous, absorbing the light and reflecting deep, inexpressible emotions, as if darkness itself had decided to envelop this world. Mikael, arms folded across his chest, thoughtfully discussed the Elheim family's magic stone, pondering its meaning and the hidden powers it might hold, like a key to ancient secrets hidden for centuries. Valto, bowing before the master, began to tell with respect everything he had learned about the Duke, trying to convey all the information he had collected, carefully hiding all the details that could harm his reputation. However, the man was unable to provide any evidence that could support his words, although he was on the brink of death more than once while carrying out a spy mission for his master, and almost paid with his life for his efforts. The guard, stunned by the situation, was surprised to notice how Mikael, after listening to his words, believed them, and did not insult him for not meeting expectations, which seemed unexpected and even somewhat strange to him. Sitting up straight with a noble look, the handsome man ordered the servant to send a letter to his father, asking him to find out more about the crystal of the Spirit of Water, a mysterious artifact that could open new horizons for their research. Smiling, Mikael sat in his chair, enjoying the moment, and feeling that his mood had improved significantly. Everything was going according to plan, and a slight optimism blossomed in his heart, despite all the difficulties and obstacles that lay ahead. The knight, with his quick and sharp mind, immediately guessed that everything was happening because of the mysterious stranger, the same transcendental man who had promised his master to remove the curse that had wrapped around his soul like heavy chains. Pensively, almost unaware of the time, the boy began to tap his toes on his leg, absorbed in the anticipation of his night guest, who, as promised, was supposed to come soon, and perhaps change the course of his life, breaking his darkness. Hearing a slight noise as if someone was stepping along the corridor, he instantly stood up from his place. His body seemed to move by itself, and without thinking, he headed forward, ready to meet the one who could give him the long-awaited freedom. There, in the shadows of the corridor, his ill-wishers were already waiting for him. Invaders who came with knives in their hands, determined to fulfill their mission regardless of the consequences and the dangers that might meet them along the way. The knight grasped the hilt of the sword that hung from his belt and instantly realized that these men had been sent by the one who had cursed him to finish what he had started, and now they were to carry out their evil will regardless of the risks. The guy, without hesitation, pulled out the dagger, clutching it tightly in his hands and leaning it against his chest, prepared to defend himself, realizing that the outcome of this night would depend on how well he could resist those who threatened his life. The mercenary, without thinking, rushed forward, trying to strike, deciding that the chances of success were high, and that this nobleman would not be able to respond to the attack with the same determination and speed as an experienced killer. The man parried the blow with astonishing ease and determination, his blade meeting his opponent's with precision, the two blades colliding with a sparkling sound, reflecting a tense struggle in which every move could be decisive. He wondered to himself who the terrible man was, who dared to send mercenaries against him, knowing that their mission was not just an attack, but the fulfillment of the curse that he carried in his body like a heavy burden. Blow after blow, the battle continued between the boys, each using their skills to gain the upper hand. The sounds of metal cutting through the air, merging with the echo of their breaths, and it seemed as if time slowed down in this brutal struggle. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door, and Mikhail, intuitively understanding that the danger had not passed, blocked the passage with himself, turning to his night guest and ordering her not to enter because the situation had become critical, and here she would be in mortal danger. The guy, in complete shock, noticed that the attackers froze as if petrified and did not move, which was extremely strange and abnormal for such experienced killers. Their bodies seemed frozen, devoid of any life, as if some force stopped them. And then he realized that it was his interlocutor's water magic that somehow saved him, using her powers to slow down or completely stop the attackers, giving him a chance to escape and distracting attention from the imminent threat. The beauty, with a slight worry in her voice, asked if Mikhail was okay, because her intuition told her that his condition could be worse than he let on, and she couldn't help but show concern for the man who had just survived danger. With a forced smile, confidently and proudly, the man declared that it could not be otherwise. He was always fine, and there was no need to worry, as if this fight was just another test on the path that he always overcomes with dignity and determination. The girl, looking closely at his face, did not believe the man's words, because she knew how difficult it was to be safe when fighting blindly and confronting mercenaries, and she could read his true state even if he tried to hide it behind a mask of confidence. Suddenly, she placed her hand on his cheek, touching it softly, noticing that the cut left on his skin was not a simple scratch. He had been hurt, and this moment touched her, making her feel even closer to this man who had gone through such a difficult ordeal. Embarrassed by such an unexpected and tender gesture, Mikhail turned away with restraint, feeling how her touch, so gentle and caring, made his heart speed up, and his inner world was suddenly filled with anxiety and unexpected warmth. Cheeks burned with a bright flame, like fiery coals, and the lady's actions confused him to the point of horror, causing his inner world to waver, as if he were standing on the edge of an abyss, not knowing what to do at this moment. The darkness of the night enveloped the mansion, absorbing everything around it like an invisible force, and it itself became even more majestic and mysterious in this darkness. The night, like a living entity, penetrated every corner, merging with its walls and giving it an unimaginable mystery. Mikhail prepared to fight off the attacks of the immobilized mercenaries with the help of his companion's sorcery, realizing that with her magical support, it would be much easier for him to deal with these opponents as if he were one step closer to victory. He ordered her to stay behind him, not to interfere in the fight, until he himself, with the help of a dagger, dealt with those who dared to disturb his peace. These people interrupted his life full of cruel trials, and now he was ready to return everything that was taken from him. Their hands began to crack, as if from the terrifying force emanating from the magic, tearing off their leather gloves and leaving their body feeling incredibly heavy, as if time itself had stopped at that moment of impact. The beauty, in complete shock, screamed and ordered the guy not to move, realizing that it could be extremely dangerous, because she herself could not accurately predict the consequences of what was happening right before their eyes. Before Mikhail could take a single step, the killers who had threatened him just a second ago began to turn into bones, their bodies rapidly disintegrating, as if death itself had overtaken them at that moment, leaving only dry skeletons. Raising her hand in front of her, the lady explained in a measured tone that it was not she who had caused such a terrible transformation. It was a curse placed upon them by someone or something that was clearly of an older and darker nature than they could have imagined. Frowning, she crouched down next to the remains of the men, pondering what had happened. The maiden knew that it could have been an old spell, but she could not say for sure which one, as the forces that caused such a transformation were hidden in the depths of ancient magics. Then, with a slight sigh, she turned to her companion, saying that now there was no more danger, and they could relax a little. But inside, she remained unclear as to how long this moment of relative calm would last. Mikal put the dagger aside with relief, as if he was throwing off a heavy burden that he had been carrying all evening. His tense body finally relaxed a little, and he felt a long-awaited relief, as if all the weight had fallen from his shoulders. The handsome man sat down tiredly on the bed, his gaze fixed on Liarte, and announced that he would send his knights to investigate this strange incident that seemed to haunt him like an invisible shadow ready to appear again. Liarte, with a slight smile on her lips, said that today she would remove another seal from the body of her interlocutor, as if adding lightness to the tense atmosphere, although her words sounded at the same time reserved and confident like a spell. The man blushed, realizing that everything she said was not just a metaphor. He agreed with her, realizing that they should begin the ritual to finally break this magical connection and save themselves from any possible consequences. The lady cast a magic spell on the air and began to heal the aristocrat, her hands moving softly, emitting a mysterious luminosity that filled the space around them, giving him a feeling of calm and strength. The boy, closing his eyes, felt the healing flowing through his body. The magic was freeing him from part of the curse, and he felt the dark forces slowly leaving only lightness and clarity in his mind. A new dawn painted the world in soft shades. The castle was filled with life, as if nature itself was awakening with each ray of sun, bringing peace and tranquility to those lands that had recently been engulfed in darkness and chaos. On the ground among the ashes and shadows lay bones, the remains of people forgotten, left over from the past, like invisible witnesses to ancient mistakes that had left their mark on this world, reminders of the dark days that had once been. The man, a handsome blonde aristocrat with bright, almost fiery eyes, sat on the throne, his gaze commanding and cold as he ordered the servants to dispose of the bones that no longer had any meaning in this new pure world. This was Lucas Franz, the crown prince of these lands, a man whose name was associated with rebirth and the restoration of order, and who now stood on the threshold of a great change, ready to lead his lands into a new era. Bowing his head before the ruler, the man asked what to do with the puppets the spies sent to the Duke, because their presence could be not only useless, but also extremely dangerous if measures were not taken. With a mocking and cold gaze, the future emperor declared that it was necessary to make the Bircha family and Elheim enemies, turning them into opponents with whom no one would dare to cooperate, and then all their secret plans would collapse. The man, still bowing before the ruler, replied that at the moment they did not know the situation and health of Mr. Birch, which made their strategic decisions very difficult and uncertain, and any hasty action could be fatal. Concerned, the prince asked if the servants thought that the two families might begin to cooperate without his knowledge, since it would disrupt all plans and undermine his own influence if their interests were hidden under the guise of an alliance. The boy knelt before the ruler, and with respect convinced him that it was unlikely that the Duke would be able to remove such a powerful curse. There was no need to worry, because the curse was cast so carefully that no magician except the head of the family himself could remove it. Lucas Franz clenched his fists on the throne in annoyance, his face contorted in anger, as he remembered how much effort he had put into this spell to punish the insolent Birch, who felt too confident in violating his authority. Everyone was convinced that Leanricius was the only person other than the head of the family who could lift a curse of such power, and despite all his might, they could not rely on other forces until this threat was removed. The order was given, and the ruler narrowed his eyes, his mind already making plans. He urgently needed to find an excuse to visit the duchy as soon as possible to make sure his enemy was still under control. Through the door, like rays of the morning sun, light penetrated into the room, reflecting the bright shades of the plants standing by the window, which filled the space with life. But nothing could hide the anxiety in the heart of the ruler ready to act. The men of the family sat around the table, their faces serious as they began to discuss the important news about the spirit stone, which had been acting strangely lately, causing everyone to worry about its possible unpredictable power. The blonde-haired youth said that the awakening of the power of water was just around the corner. His words sounded confident, but there was something more hidden in his eyes, as if he already felt that not everything was as simple as it seemed at first glance. Viamin sat modestly on his chair, looking down at the floor, feeling embarrassed and awkward, as if he couldn't find his place in this important discussion, even if his thoughts were filled with questions and confusion about what was happening. Lian Rishis stood silently in the room, his empty gaze showing no emotion, and not a single spark of joy flickering on his face. He was absorbed in his thoughts, which, like dark clouds, hid everything around him, consuming him completely. Recently, a strange event happened when a boy approached the maid asking where his sister had gone. The nice lady replied that she didn't know, and this added even more doubts to his heart, as if she was hiding something important. Leonricius flinched as a strange voice suddenly rang out, shouting his name, and thus bringing the man out of his deep thoughts, forcing him to return again to this reality where uncertainty and great danger lurked. The young man turned to his father, asking what he wanted, his voice full of curiosity and perhaps genuine concern, realizing that events were beginning to develop rapidly and required immediate action. With a smile, the old man reminded his son that he would soon be quite an adult, and therefore the time had finally come to look for a spouse for him. This was not only his parental duty, but also an important step for the future of the family. The handsome blonde man suddenly began to take out a letter from his clothes, attracting the attention of everyone around him, as if he knew that every glance was directed at him. And now he had to open the contents. It was a letter from the Crown Prince, who was planning to visit them soon to discuss important matters. Everyone understood that the visit could be not only official, but also fateful for their family. It was quite possible that he would propose an engagement to the princess herself to their family, and this could be a great opportunity to strengthen political ties. But as always, there were still many unknown intrigues hidden behind it. The boy looked down indifferently, saying that he didn't care about his wife or the royal person. However, without hiding a slight doubt, he noted that the princess could be a good candidate if fate so wished. The little girl had shown interest in him since childhood, when they were still children, sitting under a large tree and talking about what seemed important at that moment, not knowing that their future destinies would be connected as they grew older and time passed. She was cheerful and sweet, always a happy and energetic blonde, with bright red eyes that seemed to sparkle with every move she made. Her presence lit up any room, making everyone around her feel better. However, even more attractive was Liarte, his younger sister, who always remained quiet and modest, not attracting unnecessary attention to herself. But something changed in her behavior as she grew older, and this could not help but alarm him. Now, as if something had grown cold in her soul, Liarte became distant, and more often, she did not follow her brother blindly as she had before. Something hidden and complex now pulled her aside, forcing her to remain in the deep shadows. With his hands folded on the table, the man wondered when it would be best to invite the crown prince to their home, to arrange a meeting that could change their destinies and add clarity to all those questions that hung in the air. The father of the family decided to invite the ruler to an important event that would be dedicated to the Birch aristocrat, hoping that it would be a good opportunity to strengthen the ties and high-level communication that was so necessary for their family reputation. With a smile, the man said that a grand banquet would be held at night, where all the best guests would gather, and during the day there would be a hunting competition, which would be an excellent opportunity for conversation and for demonstrating the strength and skills of the participants. The man's hand rested on the blue bed, his body lay tense in anticipation, and time continued to pass. Now that many days had passed, the damned boy only had to remove the last 2 seals, which meant that he was already on the way to his long-awaited release. Liarte, feeling the moment was close, gently leaned her forehead against the guy's head. Her hands, as if in a dance with the water element, used the power of water, and splashes formed around them, which like invisible blades wrapped around them, filling the space with cold magic. Tiredly closing her eyes, she could not hide her inner exhaustion, admitting to herself that this time the magic was difficult, and its effect did not give the desired effect as easily as before, absorbing more and more strength, squeezing out the last drops of energy. Mikhail, noticing the fatigue on her face, reassured her with gentle words, saying that everything was fine, that there was no need to rush and overexert herself, because the most important thing was her health, and she had to give herself time to recuperate. A few days ago, the master confessed to his knight that he could now only discern blurry shapes and indistinct outlines of objects, as if the world around him had become darkened, leaving him in a state of constant uncertainty and confusion. The guard continued to be agitated, as it was extremely difficult to spot assassins hiding among the crowd at a hunting competition, and his anxiety only grew stronger with each passing moment, as if he felt that danger was near. The scarlet-eyed nobleman's eyes were filled with rage, and he was deeply angry at the heir to the throne who dared to organize such an event in honor of a blind man, as if it was just an entertainment for the nobles, without realizing the seriousness of the situation. The nobleman's hand clenched into a fist on the bed, and the tension grew stronger with each passing moment, as if the weight of the entire unknown situation he had found himself embroiled in was lying on him, and he could not shake off this feeling of hopelessness. Closing his eyes and squeezing them shut, the young man couldn't help but wonder if the curse that had tormented his soul for so long had really been lifted, leaving him with the feeling that it was still with him like a shadow that never left him. In the distance, a blurry figure of a girl appeared before him, and although her image remained unclear, he could only discern dark hair and a slender figure, as if the outlines of her silhouette had barely had time to form in his mind, causing a feeling of uncertainty. Slowly but surely, the lady's figure became more and more distinct, and soon her voice, quiet and gentle, called his name, breaking the silence like a gentle touch to his hearing, as if something important was calling him back to reality. And then finally, this beautiful woman, with hair as black as night and eyes like water that glowed with a mysterious light, appeared before his eyes, and she asked him with concern if everything was okay, as if she was worried about his condition. The man turned away, slightly embarrassed, unable to hide his confusion, when this beautiful girl appeared before him, whose concern for him seemed to raise more questions than answers, but he could not help but appreciate her attention. The lady, with obvious bewilderment on her face, tilted her head, trying to understand the reason for such a strange reaction from her interlocutor, because her care and attention, it seemed, should not have caused such confusion on his part. Covering his flushed face with his hand, Mikhail muttered that he was completely fine, but his words didn't sound as confident as he would have liked, which made the situation even more awkward for him. Then, with a slight sigh of relief, he added that he was glad that the first person he saw after the curse was lifted was Liarte, as if it was destined, and he couldn't help but feel grateful for her help in such a difficult moment. Taking the lady's hand in his man's, he warmly thanked her for everything she had done, feeling that this gesture could not express the full depth of his gratitude, but was as sincere as possible. Mikhail, with a slight reproachful look, kissed the aristocrat's palm, promising that the Birch family would never forget her generous act and would remember her help at this moment as a sign of great honor and dignity. Then, feeling that more needed to be said, he added that, although he still had one more curse mark on him, he believed that, with Liarte's help, they could overcome this last obstacle, looking confidently into her eyes. Mikhail was determined to keep his promise, which he made at their first meeting, and was ready to fulfill any wish of the lady without hesitation, as he always put her interests first, considering it his duty. Liarte stood there in indecision, not knowing how to answer the question, and thought, trying to comprehend what exactly she really wanted, because her thoughts were consumed by doubts and worries that did not allow her to find the right answer. The aristocrat did not want to repeat the mistakes of the past, and doubted whether Mikhail would provide real help, whether his intervention could be truly useful in the current situation, which remained a big mystery to her. Suddenly, she made up her mind and, sighing heavily, confessed to the nobleman that her real name was completely different, because deep down she considered herself a disgrace to her family, despite all her efforts to hide this fact from those around her. Her home became a real prison for her, where every day was filled with ridicule and bullying and laughter at her lack of magical abilities only aggravated her suffering and oppressed her soul, creating a feeling of alienation. The lady was often left alone, spending long hours alone on her knees, consumed with crying and locked in her inner world, where her soul was tormented by pains that she could not express in words. Now, having gathered all her determination, she confidently and firmly declared her only desire to forever break all ties with her native family, which she considered the source of her troubles and suffering. The handsome man was stunned by such a frank request, and for some time could not find words, as if struck by the depth of her intentions, which made him think about her inner world and the reasons for such a decision. After a pause, the young man, smiling slightly, said in a sincere tone that Liarte was indeed a beautiful name, and this simple phrase, filled with respect and sympathy, touched her heart. The room was exquisitely furnished, with carefully placed furniture, elegant chairs, and green plants, creating an atmosphere of calm and harmony in which every detail seemed to speak of care and attention to the space. Coming closer, Mikasil, with a sincere expression on his face, promised his interlocutor that he would definitely help her free herself from the heavy shackles that fettered her soul and life, and would do everything possible to stop her suffering. The balcony where they stood was wide open, and the sounds of conversations outside could be heard like whispers mingling with the gentle breeze, while the white walls inside reflected the atmosphere of silence and thoughtfulness that reigned in this place. On a bench located nearby sat a young couple, enthusiastically discussing something with each other. Their voices were full of liveliness and emotion, which gave a special charm to their meeting and added lightness to the space around them. The young man spoke enthusiastically about his family, revealing his roots and origins, explaining in detail that he was the heir to the famous Birch family, which for him was a source of pride and responsibility to his ancestors in the future. When he, showing interest, asked the girl to tell him about herself, she answered modestly, only saying her name, after which she fell silent, not knowing what else to say, because all her thoughts were empty and not filled with any vivid memories. The girl did not know what else to tell. She had no strong interests or deep attachments. There was nothing she loved or hated, and her life remained empty in terms of personal preferences and emotions. When the guy trying to figure out her character suggested that perhaps she liked birds, Lerte, feeling awkward, replied that perhaps that was the case, although she herself was not sure of her feelings, not knowing what she really liked. Sadly realizing this, Liarte realized that she knew almost nothing about herself because her life was spent in a closed world where she did not have the opportunity to develop as a person, remaining a prisoner of her internal limitations and external circumstances. Suddenly, Mikhail caught her attention by calling the white birds and asking what she thought of them. And this question made Liarte think about her feelings, because she never really thought about such things, as if she had lost touch with herself. The nobleman explained with interest that these white birds were used by the Birch family to send letters, and they served not only as a symbol, but also as an important element of communication between members of the family, conveying important information. The bird soared into the air, smoothly spreading its snow-white wings. Its flight was light and graceful, and it seemed that it did not feel the slightest effort, enjoying the freedom in the clear, cloudless sky. Suddenly, she landed on the girl's shoulder, chirping cheerfully, and her small body, so fragile and cute, attracted attention, adding even more coziness to the atmosphere between them. This moment became special, as if nature itself had given them this moment of silence and harmony. With a smile holding the little creature on her fingers, Liarte happily said that she really liked this bird, and her eyes lit up with sincere affection, which she had not felt for a long time, because this simple meeting awakened feelings in her. Liarte would have been happy to leave her home right now, but she knew that, as a minor, she could cause trouble for the Birch family, as the emperor, and the empire itself could interfere in their personal affairs. The young man, looking at the lady, stared at her as if he saw no problem in her decision, as if the indignation associated with the possible consequences were alien to him, and his self-confidence was obvious. The handsome man thought to himself that he would leave these lands as soon as the hunting competitions were over, but he could not leave Liarte alone, because her safety and fate were important to him, and he could not leave her. Suddenly, the nobleman stood up and suggested that once she came of age, she should leave the Elheim family and start a new life free from the old shackles, which seemed to be her only chance for freedom and a new path. An agreement was reached, and as soon as it was formalized, the birds took to the air, flying out of the open balcony and soaring into the sky, as if symbolizing a new stage in Liarte's life full of hope and change. The men's boots stopped right in the middle of the road, and the aristocrat slowly raised his gaze, as if not noticing those around him, immersed in his thoughts. But his presence could not go unnoticed. He was clearly a man to whom one should listen. With a smile, the guy with fiery red hair said with a slight sarcasm that in this place, despite all the efforts and changes, nothing had changed, and his words sounded like a reminder of eternal truths and the immutability of some things. The young man walked forward with confidence, heading towards the large mansion where his family was waiting for him, ready to welcome him back after a long absence, and every step brought him closer to the moment of reunion with those who were so dear to him. The nobleman's name was Thundrion, and as soon as he stepped into the house, he was immediately greeted by his white-haired brother, standing in the hallway, his gaze full of expectation, his face expressing joy at the imminent reunion. The Duke's second son, noticing the appearance of Thundrion, did not hesitate, waved his hand, and with slight interest inquired about the state of the spirit of the Waterstone, about which there were many rumors, and about how things were with this mysterious creature. Thundrion stood out among his family because he always wore a smile on his face, and his hair dyed bright red made him even more different from the others, emphasizing his individuality and dislike for traditions. Moreover, Thundrion went to the palace specifically to win the heart of the sweet princess, because his goal was not only to serve the family, but also to win her favor, which became an important and exciting task for him. The man responded modestly, noting that the spirit of the stone behaved as usual, absolutely calmly, and did not show itself with a single crack, continuing to silently remain in its usual silent state. Thundrion loudly stated that he was an extremely busy man, and for this reason, he could not afford to visit his sister as often as she might have liked, since his duties did not allow him time for personal visits. A huge mansion with majestic trees, arranged like mighty pillars, stood as if protecting the peace of this place, where time was subject to its own rules, and nature reigned in its strict but harmonious order. The stone, with a bright and amazingly beautiful glow, illuminated the entire room, and the water reflecting its light filled the space, creating an incredibly beautiful spectacle, as if nature itself was revealing its secret miracles at this moment. Thundrion stared in complete shock at this incredible sight, as the stone had previously been much calmer, and its behavior was predictable, but now it was clearly going beyond what could be expected. He raised his trembling hand, afraid to even touch this mysterious light that filled the space around him, as if nature itself wanted to show him an unknown miracle, but he did not dare to disturb this moment. The awakened ones from their family did not create water on their own, but could easily control its movement as if they were the masters of this element, controlling its flows at will and directing them in the right direction. The magic of the stone became more and more powerful, its light grew stronger, and bright splashes of water emanated from it as if the stone itself was trying to release its hidden power, which now overflowed the space around it. Brother Thundrion, slightly squinting his eyes from the bright light, screamed in surprise, not understanding what was happening to this mysterious crystal, which seemed to be on the verge of transforming into something completely new and unpredictable. The fog was everywhere, and there in the distance, in the shining light, the silhouette of a man appeared as if the very air around had taken shape, and from it a figure had emerged, whose presence disturbed the calm of this strange and mystical moment. It was a young man whose hair seemed to have been pulled out of the water itself, light and transparent like the waves that carried him through space, without disturbing the harmony of this world in which he found himself. An incredibly beautiful boy, his eyes sparkling with a living light, looked around the strangers in the room with curiosity. He himself was a spirit of water, whose presence felt like something natural, and at the same time mystical, like the magic of the elements themselves. Raising his hand in the air, the young man nevertheless looked somewhat older than his years, as if he had the power of antiquity hidden within him, as he asked where the awakened man who had caused him to appear in this place was. Elheim, shocked by what was happening, froze in surprise, not understanding what kind of strange creature had appeared in their house, and what it had in common with those forces that had previously seemed to him only myths. Meanwhile, Thundrion stood nearby, trembling with fear, because such strength and power as this youth could not belong to an ordinary person. The man felt that something much greater and more dangerous than he could imagine stood before him. This boy, the spirit of water, seemed at once a monster and a deity surrounded by the water element, as if nature itself had submitted to him, and he was its embodiment. So powerful and mysterious was his presence. A member of the Elheim family, unable to contain his emotions, loudly asked the stranger who he was and why he had appeared in this house, because everything that was happening seemed incredible and disturbing, like something that was beyond the ordinary. The water spirit frowned and replied that he had asked first, calling his interlocutor impudent, since his patience had run out, and he was not going to hide his irritation, believing that he should no longer be asked questions without respect. The young man screamed in horror as waves of water suddenly attacked them, quickly engulfing them and making them feel like the world around them was changing, as if the elements themselves had decided to intervene in their fate, leaving no chance for salvation. Like tentacles, the waves grabbed the boys, immobilizing them and holding them in their powerful grip. The spirit of water was clearly displeased. His actions were full of rage, as if he wanted to punish them for not understanding or disrespecting his power. The young man haughtily replied that he was the 10th weapon and the first assistant of famous people whose names have entered into legends, leaving a mark in history as powerful and unsurpassed masters of their arts, possessing unimaginable strength. Thundrion's eyes widened in shock, realizing that the people the boy had named were the original owners of the Power Stone, the ones who had once wielded this unique power and whose actions had determined the fate of entire worlds. With a smile, the youth mockingly confirmed the guesses of her companions that he was the king of spirits, the embodiment of strength and power, whose power extended beyond the visible, allowing him to rule all the elements and those who obeyed them. The boy began to approach the guys with feigned carelessness, mocking them that for the descendants of such a strong family as theirs, they looked too weak, as if nature itself had not spared their legacy, leaving only shadows of their great ancestors. With a wave of his hand, the king of spirits released his captives, but his voice was insistent and full of malice when he asked where the man was, who had awakened him for his appearance in this world, seemed to him an unexpected and unpleasant disturbance of his peace. The men fell to the floor, trembling with fear. Their bodies were gripped by a terrible premonition, and they could not move, fearing what might follow, because every step they took could be their last in this terrible confrontation. Thunderion looked up in horror, realizing that if they remained silent, this boy might actually kill them, because to him they were nothing more than simple ants that he could easily destroy without a second thought. The white-haired boy shouted loudly to the spirit that the awakened man was in this very house, and his words were full of determination, as if he knew that in this way he could at least slightly change the course of events and save his companions. With this answer, the spirit was satisfied, his face softened a little, and with apparent calm, he ordered the successor of their family to be brought to this place in 3 days, as if his demands were simple and obvious, and there was not the slightest doubt about their fulfillment. The boys realized that the spirit had gone back to sleep in the stone, and that they had a dangerous task ahead of them: to bring their brother here the next day, right after the end of the hunting competition, because it was impossible not to fulfill the requirements. The crystal, protected by bright light, seemed to live its own life, radiating such power that it seemed as if its light was capable of tearing apart the space around it, filling all living things with incredible energy. When they brought the head of the family to the door of the house, they found that the door refused to open, as if nature itself had decided that their time had not yet come, and they had to face a new obstacle on the way to fulfilling their mission. The father, irritably calling his sons idiots, shouted that one of them should have stayed inside to watch what was happening, because all this was extremely suspicious, and they should have been prepared for any possible consequences. The old man, dissatisfied and not really trusting his sons, began to doubt their words, and at that time they told him that the King of Spirits had ordered them to bring the awakened one here in 3 days, and this was not just their choice, but an obligation that they could not ignore. However, the young man was sure that if Leonricius came here with them tomorrow, the door would definitely open, because his presence in this house was the key that could unlock all the barriers standing in their way. The head of the family, after thinking deeply, declared that if Leonricius decided to take Liarte with him to the hunting competition, then so be it, because in this family, everyone had to follow their own path, even if it meant facing uncertain consequences. The day of the competition arrived. Tents were pitched in the forest, and people were excitedly discussing the upcoming events, each of them expecting victory. But deep down, they all knew that this would not be just a test of strength, but a test of loyalty and determination. Michael, with a red patch over his eye, walked forward, proudly stepping on the ground, and behind him followed his knight, his faithful companion, always ready to protect him from any dangers that might arise on the way to their victory. In the distance, in the dim light of dawn, Leonricius also stood, his figure confident and strong, and next to him was his sister. They were talking about something as if their whole life was connected to this moment when the fate of their family was being decided. Mikhail involuntarily thought that he liked the brother of the lady who saved him less and less, since the man was too intrusive and impudent, which could not help but irritate him. And at that moment, the emperor himself unexpectedly turned to him. The nobleman answered with restraint, that the journey had gone smoothly without incident or surprise, and he seemed even a little surprised that no difficulties had arisen along the way, despite all the fears. After that, he gratefully thanked the ruler for his concern, forcing a smile, although in his mind he could not get rid of the thought that only one last seal remained to be removed, and then the curse would be lifted, and he would gain freedom. Suddenly, Mikhail's attention was again drawn to his savior, who stood at a distance, her figure standing out from the surrounding people, as if she was destined to return his thoughts to her and her fate. She was quarreling furiously about something with her brother, who was answering her rudely, and the lady seemed deeply offended her face, expressing such pain as if she could not find words to answer his sharp reproaches. The way Lian Ricius squeezed her hand so tightly and roughly was absolutely unacceptable for a true gentleman who would never allow himself to behave in such a way, especially not letting her leave, as if indicating her powerlessness. Miko, like a sly fox, smiled faintly, realizing that he still had one unsolved problem, and he would not allow anyone, even the most highborn, to treat his Liarte as if she were an insignificant object for their game. The beauty sat sadly and alone in the forest, hugging her knees with her hands, her gaze directed somewhere into the distance, as if she was looking for answers to questions that she could not formulate, absorbed in her thoughts and experiences. Lian Ricius had been acting strange lately, inviting her to hunting competitions, and his behavior was unusual, as if there was a secret hidden in his words that he wanted to reveal, but could not find the right moment. The real question that was tormenting him was what game his sister would like him to get for her, since it was an important matter that she had to answer, but her silence only increased the tension between them. Receiving no answer, he could not restrain himself. His anger flared up, and grabbing her hand, he ordered her to finally decide for herself what she wanted, because his patience was at its limit, and he was not going to waste any more time on her silence and indecision. The noblewoman shyly asked the boy for the silver fox, but only on one condition, that he not kill it, because in her eyes there was a deeply hidden affection for this animal, and she could not allow it to suffer its fate in the hands of a hunter. The young man smiled confidently. A playful grin appeared on his face, and not doubting his abilities, he promised to get the animal for his sister, assuring her that it would be as easy as pie, despite the possible difficulties. And only after that did he finally let go of the girl, leaving traces of his fingers on her hand that felt like a reminder of his power and harshness. These prints, like footprints, left a deep mark, not only on her body, but also in her memory, not allowing her to forget his presence. Now the noblewoman sat under the tree, confused and lost in thought, not understanding how her brother was going to catch such a rare animal, because his confidence in his own strength seemed to her increasingly unfounded, and his plans unrealistic. The woman's fingers squeezed the fabric of her clothes, and feeling the heaviness inside, she realized that now, after being reborn, the family ties that had previously brought her love and support now only irritated her, forcing her to see them as nothing but a hindrance. Liarte jumped and stood up when she suddenly heard someone calling her name from behind, and her heart stopped for a moment in surprise, and her feelings were filled with anxiety, as if she found herself in a familiar but forgotten world. The aristocrat quickly looked around, and her eyes widened in surprise, a mixture of shock and confusion in their depths, as if the reality in front of her had suddenly transformed and become impossible to understand. There behind her stood Mikhail, with a slight smile, and on his face there was no usual red ribbon that usually hid his eyes. Now they were open and expressed something important and hidden that she could not immediately understand. The young man looked truly stunning. His hair was elegantly styled to the side, and his eyes sparkled with a rich red hue full of hidden passion and confidence, like a knight ready to fight for his honor. Coming closer to his interlocutor, he quietly explained that he had come here because he was sure that this was the place Liarte would go to, and he could not allow her path to turn out to be different from what he had predicted in his heart. The lady, carefully tucking a strand of hair behind her ear, deftly dealt with the unruly strand that had come loose due to the wind, and her gesture was light and elegant, as if she always remained prepared for any unexpected events, like a true aristocrat. Sitting down next to his companion, the man pointed his finger at her injured hand. With a slight expression of sympathy in his voice, he said that it must have hurt a lot, and in his words, there was a quiet concern for her condition. Liarte simply waved this off, saying with a slight grin that she had long since gotten used to her brother's rude treatment, and for her such little things had long become part of her normal life without causing any particular emotions. Resting his head in his hands, Mikhail firmly stated that he would not allow her to talk like that anymore, not wanting her to continue to get used to pain, since he was ready to protect her from anything that caused even the slightest discomfort. Shocked by such unexpected care, she asked in surprise why Birch had come here, not understanding what could have prompted him. In response, the man said with a smile that he simply missed her and wanted to be near her again despite the circumstances. Caught in the act, her mouth slightly open, the noblewoman's lips twitched slightly as she realized that Michael truly cared about her, and the thought touched her deeply, causing warmth in her heart and a slight smile. Liarte smiled sweetly and admitted that she was genuinely glad that Bircha had come here. The care and attention at that moment meant more to her than she could ever put into words, giving her the feeling of warmth and confidence that she so needed. The guy was embarrassed, feeling a little embarrassed by her reaction, and getting up from his seat, awkwardly said that it was time for him to leave, because he had other things to do and he couldn't stay. But before leaving, he still decided to ask his companion if she would come to the banquet that evening, because it was important for him to know if he would see her again at such an important event for both of them. Instantly, her memory flashed back to her brother's invitation, who had asked her with obvious indifference to go with him to the banquet after the competition. And despite his coldness, Liarte couldn't help but feel a little uneasy. Mikhail, pleased that he had received her consent proudly, and with a slight puff of his chest, declared that he would certainly invite her to dance at the ball, because it was important to him that she be the center of his attention. Squinting his eyes, he added that he would be happy to teach her to dance if she didn't know how, and then with a slight smile said goodbye, hinting that this was only the beginning of their communication and that they would meet again very soon. The forest road led through rocks and pines, surrounded by fog, as if nature itself slowed down its steps, giving time for reflection, absorbing thoughts, as if in this place the world became more mysterious and enigmatic. The man walked forward confidently, his steps sounding firm and heavy on the ground, surrounded by tall, dark trellises of trees, as if he were a part of this majestic forest, and the forest a part of him. It was Leon Ricius, dressed in magnificent hunting clothes. His face was sullen and serious. His eyes glided with a concentrated gaze over the surrounding expanses, and he was looking for his prey with the precision of an experienced hunter. Noticing a lock of hair lying on the ground, he bent down to carefully pick it up, and there was something exquisitely attentive in this gesture, as if he were searching for traces in this silent forest to understand who had passed here before him. Grabbing a strand in his hand, he noticed that the hair was light and belonged to a blond man, and then lifting it slightly, his face filled with slight surprise, as if this was part of something much more important. His brothers were not immediately aware of his intentions when he stated that he was going to catch a rare silver fox, an animal that was known for its stealth and ability to avoid traps, which made them wonder about the seriousness of his goal. The father was shocked, but at the same time pleasantly surprised, to learn what a difficult and highly prized prey his son had chosen. And there was something symbolic about it, as if he himself had not expected Leon Ricius to choose such a difficult and dangerous target. Leon Ricius persistently approached the head of the family, asking with confidence and determination if he knew anything about the silver animals that were extremely difficult to find and catch. And there was a slight insistence in his voice, as if he was willing to take a risk for this, with a smile that the silver foxes had been exterminated by their ancestors. And there was a slight sadness in his voice, as if this fact was not just history for him, but some kind of inevitable loss that left a mark on their kind. However, Leon Ricius, despite his words, was determined. He was determined to catch at least one silver fox that remained in their duchy and present it to his sister, hoping that this would restore her former kindness and faith in the world. Perhaps he thought his sweet sister would become her old self again, kind and bright, and would follow him as she once did, full of faith and serene love for her older brother, restoring the connection they had lost. Hearing the strange sound, Leon Ricius instantly turned around his ears, perked up, as if he sensed something approaching, and his hunter's instincts took over again, filling his mind with the readiness to act. The boy immediately headed in the direction from which the noise was coming. His steps were quiet and careful, as if he was trying not to disturb the silence of the forest, so as not to scare away the dangerous but beautiful creature hiding in the bushes. Through the branches and leaves, he noticed white ears barely visible among the greenery and fluffy fur that swayed softly in the wind. His heart began to beat faster. It was a fox, rare and amazing as he expected. It was a small white fox with fluffy fur. Its movements were soft, graceful, and cautious, like those of a creature accustomed to hiding in the shadows, remaining invisible to the eyes of others, as if nature itself had given it the ability to blend in with the world around it. But suddenly, at that moment, the little star of the forest, as he called it to himself, screamed loudly in pain when she was almost waylaid. Her weak body shook with pain, and Leonricus realized that her fate hung by a thread, and his actions could affect everything. Leonricus shuddered in fear, realizing that the fox could have been almost killed, and his sister had instructed him to bring her back alive. And now everything depended on his actions to save her at the last moment and avoid tragedy. The fox cub lay unconscious on the ground, but Leonricus noticed that he was alive, just asleep from the intense stress, and this gave him hope that everything could still be fixed. Leonricus noticed that the fox had been caught by another hunter who had shot it, and at that moment his anger was uncontrollable. He quickly rose to his feet, ready to enter into conflict with the man who had disrupted his plans and invaded his territory. Irritated and with a clear threat in his voice, he asked the hunter what he was doing here, how he dared to encroach on his prey, and in his eyes, one could read the readiness to defend his goal, not allowing outside interference. The man standing in front of him was Mr. Birch, who, carefully picking up the fox in his arms, asked affectionately, and with a slight mockery, what the problem was, as if everything that was happening was just an easy game for him. Mikhail, with a wicked smile on his lips, stated that he had more skill and savvy than Leonricus, adding that he was probably a better hunter than the one standing before him, and would have regretted his approach more than once. As he passed the aristocrat, the man continued with slight disdain, adding that next time Leonricus should be much more careful and think faster if he wanted to not only maintain his reputation, but also avoid unnecessary problems. Mikhail smiled with a hint of sarcasm as he explained that no one could accurately predict when something important would be taken away from him, and there was a subtle threat in his words, as if he was ready to meet any challenge. The nobleman clenched his fists in anger, unable to contain his indignation at being insulted so shamelessly and with obvious irony. His gaze became sharp as a blade, piercing the atmosphere, ready to cut through the silence of this conflict as soon as he decided to act. At that moment, the sunset outside the mansion window was amazingly beautiful. Its fiery rays touched the earth, creating a feeling of calm and comfort, as if the whole world had frozen, giving time to think and consider further steps. The maiden sat on the bed, deep in thought, and the silence in the room seemed almost tangible, as if the very atmosphere around her was waiting for an answer, ready to respond to her every word. There was a box next to her, a gift from her brother, but she never dared to open it, leaving it untouched as a symbol that something important and unknown was still waiting for its time. After the rebirth, the beauty's appearance and behavior changed so much that even those closest to her could not help but notice her new appearance. And now her relationships with others have become completely different, full of confidence and determination. Before she found herself in the past, the girl shed many tears. But this moment became a turning point for her, because it was then that she completely changed herself, deciding not to succumb to fate anymore, not wanting to find herself in the shadow of death again. Inside the box, neatly wrapped in cloth, was a new blue dress adorned with bright red gemstones and intricate embroidery, giving the impression that it was destined to change her life and appearance. Liarte looked at her reflection in the mirror, carefully assessing every detail as if trying to find the answer to a question she did not dare ask herself, and her gaze was full of anxiety and doubt. She didn't like herself at all. Her hair was unkempt, as if forgotten in the rush of morning chores, and her old dress, which had already lost its attractiveness and freshness, only emphasized her inner anxiety and dissatisfaction with herself. Looking at her reflection, Liarte saw herself as old in the shackles of a white dress, unfree, as if all her hopes were contained in this image that was not herself, but only a reflection of her former fears and limitations. Now she was ready to embrace her true identity, realizing that her destiny was in her own hands. Determined to change the future, she took charge of her life and no longer allowed the past to dictate her path. The white carriage, elegantly parked near the mansion, stood in anticipation of the coming evening, when the last rays of the sun painted the sky in soft golden hues, creating an atmosphere of mysterious anticipation. The butler, respectfully offering his hand to the princess, helped her off the transport, carefully supporting her, so that she could descend the steps with the grace that was characteristic only of her high position and regal charm. Seeing her beloved among the guests, the noblewoman raised her hand and waved to him joyfully. Her face lit up with a smile, and lights of happiness lit up in her eyes, as if everything around had disappeared, leaving only him. After which, unable to contain her emotions, she hugged the guy by his strong arm, clinging to him tenderly, and slightly embarrassed, babbled that she missed him very much, as if she could not wait to meet him despite all the obstacles. Leonritius greeted the princess with a smile, offering his hand to become her gentleman for the evening, his manners impeccable and his gaze full of respect and admiration. The man looked impeccable. His black hair was neatly combed back, and his eyes, the color of a clear sky, radiated confidence and calm, as if he was not just a participant, but an important figure of this evening. Next to the princess stood the crown prince, dressed in a luxurious fur cloak that gave him a majestic appearance. His golden hair sparkled in the candlelight, and his slight smile added mystery and charm. The hall was already filled with aristocrats eagerly discussing the latest events and innovations that were to be discussed at the event, filling the space with voices and animated conversations, which created an atmosphere of tense anticipation. The royal family, the prince, princess, and her lover, stood a little to the side, watching the proceedings, their presence noticeable, but they maintained the restraint of true royalty. The Elheim brothers approached them, each of whom greeted the royals with respect and reverence. Their manners were impeccable, and their gaze was full of respect for the high position of their interlocutors. The beauty only laughed at the red-haired guy's ridiculous words, mockingly saying that his reasoning was completely stupid and not worthy of attention. Her gaze was pierced with slight contempt. Thundrion stood next to the prince, who with a smile noted that he had received a gift from them earlier, and was happy his voice was warm and sincere, as if he truly appreciated the gesture of attention, and was grateful for the sign of respect. After which, the future ruler abruptly changed the subject, suddenly remembering the hunting competitions that had been held earlier, which in his opinion could be an excellent topic of conversation to ease the tense atmosphere a little. Looking away, the nobleman swallowed, slightly wiped the sweat from his face, and said that the hunt had been a success, trying to hide his nervousness, but his words sounded a little strained, as if he himself was not sure of what he was saying. The prince, keeping a suspicious eye on him, immediately noticed that something was wrong. He realized that something important had happened in the competition, but no one wanted to reveal the details to him, as if the secret was hidden behind a curtain of silence. At this time, Mr. Birch stood to the side, his eyes blindfolded with a red ribbon, his figure calm and unhurried. He seemed not to be taking part in the conversation at all, only leaning relaxedly against the column, as if hiding his thoughts and emotions behind this strange gesture. The man was as handsome as a wild rose. His golden hair glittered in the light, and his expensive clothes emphasized his elegance, creating the image of a noble and self-confident man who attracted attention. The future ruler smiled slyly, noticing that Mikael had not lifted the curse. His words were full of mockery and malicious irony, as if there was a deep sting hidden in it, which he was pleased to inflict. Suddenly, the princess, unable to bear the silence, turned to her brother, asking what he was thinking about so hard. Her gaze was full of genuine concern, because her brother was always focused, but now something was clearly bothering him. After which, barely audibly, the beauty whispered in the prince's ear that for some reason Leonricius was upset about something today. Her words were full of sympathy, as if she was trying to understand what could have affected his mood so much. Elheim immediately darkened when he was asked about his sister, and his face instantly darkened with a dark aura hanging around him, as if his entire world had been consumed by hostility towards the one who dared to bring up the topic. Previously, the prince had not paid much attention to the duke's daughter. She always behaved quietly and unnoticeably, as if merging with the background of everyone present. But today, something in her presence clearly attracted his attention. Suddenly, the noblewoman clapped her hands, and with a playful glint in her eyes, drew her brother's attention to the man who had just entered the hall, as if she had decided that this moment should not be ignored by him. It was a maiden of incredible beauty. Her graceful foot in a black shoe stepped up the stairs with such grace that it seemed her movement was part of the evening itself, as if she were leading her invisible dance party. It was Liarte, and in her new dress, she looked like a flower, innocently lovely. Her night blue dress with red stones sparkled like darkness itself, but there was a special sparkle in her eyes, making her absolutely charming. Her face was refined with large eyes, like a reflection of the clear sky, and her black hair, long as silk, flowed smoothly over her shoulders, creating an impression of mysterious and elegant beauty, as if she were part of some magical world. The head of the family was in complete shock at how his daughter had changed. Her appearance in the hall struck him to the depths of his soul because he had never seen her like this. Confident, beautiful, and undoubtedly attractive. Liarte, who politely apologized for her behavior, attracted the attention of her brothers, who, observing her, immediately noticed how much she resembled her mother, as if the same beauty and grace had been transmitted to the daughter despite the passing years. The princess was delighted with the arrival of the aristocrat. She was completely delighted with how much the maiden had changed. Her transformation was unexpected, and it gave the impression that the girl had gone through real magic. The ladies' brothers were also surprised seeing their sister like this for the first time. Beautiful and graceful, they could not hide their amazement because the sweet Liarte became a real beauty whose presence filled the hall with a special, incredible light. The aristocrat's behavior was impeccable. Every step she took was full of sophistication and confidence. She moved with such grace that it seemed as if her presence in this room gave everything that was happening a special significance and grandeur. Previously, the girl always wanted to become part of her family, wanting to be accepted and loved, but she was often considered a black sheep. She reached out to her twin brother, but he felt only disgust towards her, ignoring her feelings and needs. In the past, the boy had always rudely ordered his sister not to follow him, not allowing her to be near him, as if her presence was some kind of burden for him, and her attempts to find a place in his world were always met with his cold cruelty. Now, Liarte was an adult, and her gaze, full of cold judgment, slid impartially over the members of the family, radiating a terrifying indifference, as if she no longer belonged to this world, but only observed people with absolute detachment. Leonricius, feeling her gaze, clenched his teeth in irritation. It was unpleasant for him to realize that his sister, once so innocent and reaching out to him, now stood before him like a stranger, cold and inaccessible, like an ice monument. The brother was about to ask his sister to dance, but was rudely interrupted by another man who did not allow the handsome man to continue his intention, breaking the moment with such an unceremonious intervention. Mikhail Bersha reacted faster, wasting no time, and with a confident smile invited the beauty to dance, determined to capture her attention, not allowing anyone to become an obstacle to his plan. The guy smiled slyly. His gaze was full of confidence and determination, as if he was already ready to kidnap this beautiful lady from the family, leaving her among all these aristocrats without much regret. Anger and rage, like poisonous arrows, pierced the heart of the Duke's son, causing his gaze to become sharp and full of irritation as he watched Birch with obvious disdain, feeling his patience rapidly dwindling. Liarte, in complete shock, stared at the hand extended to her, hesitating and not daring to take it, as if her indecision and fear of this step were fighting with the desire to continue this dance, filled with many unclear emotions. However, gathering all her will into a fist, Liarte extended her palm, holding back her inner trembling, and placed it in the man's hand. The step was for her like overcoming her own doubts and fears, as if she was ready to meet the unknown, what awaited her ahead. Liarte smiled, her eyes light and confident, as she said in a soft but determined tone that she would be happy to dance with this man, as if telling the world that she was no longer that timid girl. Leonricius, not believing, his eyes looked at his sister in shock, surprised to realize that she had accepted an offer to dance from a complete stranger, and it seemed no longer felt like she belonged to his world. Now he was like a boy standing there in confusion, watching his sister walk away from him, leaving him behind, not following him, as she always did before, and with every step moving further and further away. Music was playing throughout the room, its gentle sounds echoing smoothly, with the golden towel, and the large chandelier hanging from the ceiling reflected the light, creating a sense of magic, as if everything in this moment was unpredictable and alien to everyone. A young couple, completely absorbed in the music, danced among others. Their movements were so harmonious and refined that they resembled a waltz, as if they had entered another magical world, where there was no place for worries and anxieties, only harmony and peace. In her past life, the maiden was wounded while trying to protect her brother, and her wound was the result of the machinations of the imperial family, their intrigues and cruel plans that destroyed her world and brought chaos to her destiny. Mikhail, deprived of sight, was still the same crown prince, a strong man and a dangerous competitor whose ambitions did not allow him to remain in the shadows, and his every step could result in either victory or destruction. The coat of arms of the imperial family, decorated with gold, symbolized not only their unlimited power, but also the arrogance, the cold villainy that stood behind their every decision, which could only bring evil and suffering. Concerned, Liarte quietly asked her dance partner if it was dangerous to dance with her, if they had attracted too much attention, since there might be those in the audience looking for reasons for new intrigues and revenge. Miko couldn't help but shudder when he heard her words, realizing that there was a person in the room whose connection to his curse was direct and undeniable. It was the one who had once taken away everything he loved, forever changing his destiny and leaving an indelible mark on his life. But after that, Mikael smiled, rejoicing at how quick-witted and smart his beloved was, because she had already managed to understand what was happening around her. And no matter what the world was like, she always remained by his side. Having twirled the lady in a whirlwind of dance, he, with a slight grin, said that the one who cursed him was clearly mistaken in believing that he was still blind, because in fact he saw much more than they could imagine. Bringing the beauty closer to him, pulling her by the waist, Mikael, with a gentle smile, reminded her that as soon as she came of age, she would have to come to his home, where a new chapter of their life awaited them. The young man continued to smile, inviting the lady to go with him, as if it were the most natural step, and his words were filled not only with an offer, but also with confidence that she would accept his offer without hesitation. Leanne Ricious watched his sister's every move with tension as she danced in the arms of that vile Bircha, his eyes never leaving their couple, feeling his anxiety growing and the fire of anger and jealousy flaring in his chest. His manly hand was clenched into a fist so tightly that his knuckles were white. Every nerve in his body was taut as a string, giving him no rest from the rage that overwhelmed him. He could not just calmly watch this. In his mind, Leon Riccius was going over a plan to forever bind his sister Liarte to the duchy and their family, never giving her a chance to escape and leave. He was willing to do anything to ensure that she would stay close, never leaving their world. The nobles in the hall danced with ease, creating an atmosphere of fun and carefreeness. Their movements were smooth and graceful, as if the whole world around was immersed in this evening, not knowing any worries or anxieties. One of the ladies, stepping on a red shoe with a bow, stopped tiredly. Her legs ached from the long dance, but she still kept a smile on her face, feeling how the tension in her body gradually went away. The princess, slightly tired from dancing, suggested to her partner to take a break and take a walk silently, adding that she needed to rest a little, and also that this was the moment when she could talk without unnecessary noise and fuss around. Meanwhile, the Duke and the Crown Prince were quietly talking about a possible engagement between the young couple, exchanging glances full of expectation and hope, discussing the importance of this connection for the future of their family and lineage. A glass of red wine filled to the brim swayed gently in her hands, and the scarlet drink shimmered in the candlelight like a harbinger of coming changes, filled with difficult decisions and important choices. The heir to the throne, with clear confidence, proposed not to delay and immediately send the engagement documents, believing that not a minute should be lost in order to consolidate the future relationship and ensure the union. The Duke was about to agree to the heir's proposal, but their conversation was interrupted by the confident voice of Leonricius, who decisively said the word no, making it clear that he had his own opinion on this matter. The men stopped stunned and turned to the young nobleman, waiting for an explanation, because his answer was unexpected, considering how important this moment was for all their families. Leonricius, with a fixed expression on his face, asked to first hear his opinion before making a decision about the wedding, emphasizing that he had the right to a voice, and that his position needed to be understood before making a final decision. The boy quietly muttered that he planned to marry the princess only when he came of age, and only when he was confident in his strength and determination, and not earlier as suggested. The prince agreed that the Duke's son was indeed incredibly intelligent and wise, capable of making decisions that were not only reasonable, but also thought out many steps ahead, which made him a worthy partner for the royal family. The princess, without hiding her smile, admitted that if Leonritius had made such a decision for her sake, she was deeply grateful and touched by his willingness to protect her interests, even against the will of her elders. However, Leonritius himself wanted only one thing: to become a duke as soon as possible, in order to have power, not giving Liarte the opportunity to escape imprisoning her within the walls of his house, like in a cage, so as not to give her a choice. The huge house had many corridors, a bright light space, but no trace of the bright sun, which could not penetrate inside, because of the high walls creating the illusion of a strange world hidden from external reality. A maiden in a long black dress stood in a dark room where a piano stood covered in dust and paintings covered with cloth, gave the room a sad, abandoned atmosphere, as if everything had been forgotten and left in time. This was the place where the Duke raised his children, strictly monitoring their behavior. His hand knew no mercy, and he often resorted to methods that seemed to him the only correct ones, even if they left pain in hearts. Little Liarte then sobbed, holding back tears after receiving a painful blow to the cheek from a parent who, despite his love, often showed his rudeness and uncompromisingness in his upbringing. The maiden's quarrel was suddenly interrupted by her father, who burst into the room radiating malice and cruelly accused her, declaring that he had seen her dancing with Mr. Birch, which he considered absolutely inadmissible and unprincipled. The noblewoman, without showing the slightest emotion, calmly turned to her parent and quietly asked him what he actually expected to hear in response, as if she herself could not understand why his reaction was so sharp. The aristocrat looked at her father with determination and pride, not hiding her confidence, and asked why she could not dance with Bercha, since her hair was fluttering in the wind, and she herself was the personification of beauty and grace worthy of such company. The girl was no longer the naive child who had once been afraid of her strict and cruel father, and now stood before him full of determination and self-confidence, ready to accept the consequences of her actions. The man gritted his teeth in rage as he looked at his daughter, realizing that this was another clever trick on her part, another test of his patience, and the power she was willing to put on the line for the sake of her freedom. Pointing his finger awkwardly and angrily at his daughter, the Duke angrily shouted that she was behaving like a capricious teenager, clearly trying to get his attention with such cheap manipulations. The noblewoman was dumbfounded. Her blood ran cold when she heard her father's words, which pierced her heart, because he loudly declared that he never considered her his daughter, and that she was never part of their family. Gathering her last strength, Liarte frowned. Her gaze became sharp and determined, and unexpectedly for herself, she replied that in fact she had never considered the Duke her father either, no matter how much he tried to convince her otherwise. The man recoiled in shock, as if he had been struck, not believing his ears, since from such a fragile, quiet girl, he did not expect such a sharp and irreconcilable answer, which cast doubt on their entire past relationship. Liarte always tried to attract the attention of her family, trying to become a part of it. But instead of being understood, she only encountered alienation and coldness, which left deep wounds in her heart. As a little girl, she often cried alone, not understanding why her efforts went unnoticed, why her feelings and desires, so sincere and strong, drowned in emptiness, as if she simply did not exist. The man's stern voice cut through the silence as he asked with obvious doubt if his daughter realized what her words meant, that she no longer wanted to be part of their family, as if her decision was something frightening and irreversible. Liarte, placing her hands on the keys of the old piano, as if to emphasize this determination, replied that she no longer wished to bear the name Elheim, since the family that had rejected her could not be her home. With pride, but also with resentment in her voice, she declared that she was no longer going to obey other people's rules and stay away from Mr. Birch, especially when she could choose her own destiny. The father was stunned by his daughter's insolent behavior. His face was covered with anger, and her words sounded to him like outright impudence, capable of destroying all his ideas about family and duty. Previously, this room was where all her loved ones gathered, and it was here that she often sat down at the piano to play, immersing everyone in the world of music, which was an important part of her life and brought her comfort. The father was never able to come to terms with the tragic loss of his wife. He often blamed his only daughter for her death, who reminded him of his deceased beloved, and this caused him the deepest pain. The lady was deprived of the gifts of magic and did not possess special powers, so she became an unwitting victim of circumstances, and her life turned into an endless struggle with fate and the injustice of the world around her. The lady's health rapidly deteriorated, especially after she gave birth to several children. Her fragile body could not withstand the burden of motherhood, and this only aggravated her suffering, adding new torments to an already difficult existence. And so, when the lady gave birth to Liarte and her brother, her health finally began to decline, and she withered away like a withered flower, quietly dying in her bed, leaving behind only a shadow of her former life. With hatred in her voice, Liarte said that her father was a pathetic man because he blamed the child for the death of his mother, and unable to contain her emotions, she walked past him, not allowing herself to be weak in his presence anymore. She slammed the door shut with a loud bang, and only the nobleman remained in the room alone, with his own thoughts, which tormented him like the edge of a knife, while everything around him sank into silence. The aristocrat stood at the piano that his wife had once played, looking thoughtfully at the keys, as if trying to find answers to the questions that tormented his soul, absorbed in memories of happy days. His wife, dying on her bed with her last strength, held his hand and asked him to take care of the children. Her gaze was full of love and hope, and she remained for him the most beautiful woman he had ever known. The Duke struck the piano loudly and furiously, his anger spilling out in one powerful gust, as if the sound could somehow ease the pain in his heart and calm the anxiety boiling within. The nobleman did not want to admit the bitter truth, and trying to calm his conscience, tried to convince himself that all the blame lay with Liarte, because she was born unawakened, and it was her existence that caused the death of her good mother. He did not believe that Liarte would ever awaken his power and be able to free the spirit of water. This thought seemed impossible to him, as if nature itself rejected such a possibility, leaving only a fog of uncertainty. Night fell upon the estate, swallowing the corridors and towers in a dark embrace. Darkness hid everything around, and only the weak light of the moon, breaking through the windows, illuminated the empty walls, creating a feeling of complete silent loneliness. Liarte finally removed the final seal from Birch, completely freeing him from the dark curse that had held him captive for so many years. This allowed him to feel the freedom he had longed for, filling his heart with hope and relief, which changed his life forever. The man, thanking her for her help, noticed that the maiden was not in her right mood that day, as if something was bothering the aristocrat greatly, and the sweet noblewoman was apparently upset by something that did not give her inner peace. With her head down, the lady quietly shared that, during the day, she went into the disciplinary room where she accidentally met her father, and this meeting turned out to be extremely unpleasant, leaving a heavy feeling in her soul. There were no visible marks of beatings on her body, and the nobleman, upon learning this, felt a sense of relief in his soul, as if the burden he had carried for so long had finally become lighter, and he did not have to worry about her safety. The young man offered his companion to lean on him. If she was tired, he was ready to become her support and encouragement, promising to be there so that the girl would not feel so lonely and exhausted at this moment. The lady ignored his offer. Her face remained impassive and indifferent, as if she had no interest or desire to turn to him for help. She chose to keep her feelings hidden, not revealing a single emotion to him. But suddenly, completely unexpectedly for him, she pressed herself against his chest, embracing him with such sincere tenderness that this caused Mr. Birch the strongest surprise, and the man's heart sank from the unexpectedness of her bold and unexpected act. Mikhail blushed with embarrassment. His cheeks were burning, and his eyes were filled with shock and bewilderment. He did not know how to react to this unexpected closeness. His inner world exploded with mixed emotions. The noblewoman, having calmed down a little, said that she had recently met with her father, and that they had had a heated argument during which she had decisively declared that she no longer wanted to be part of her family because she was striving for freedom from their influence. Clutching his men's shirt in her hands, she wondered if she had done the right thing, and looked at the guy with slight anxiety, not knowing how he would perceive her words and actions, worrying that she could make some kind of stupid mistake. Birch was in no hurry to answer, well aware that this was the first time the lady had opened her soul to him, openly expressing her thoughts and feelings. He did not want to rush this moment, preferring to listen to her every word with respect and attention. Without thinking twice, he hugged his beloved tighter, assuring her that she had done the right thing, and that she should not have clung to people who did not appreciate her, because her happiness should be more important than other people's opinions. The lady froze in confusion at the nobleman's question. She did not understand what exactly he wanted to know, what terrible thing her Elheim family had done to her, and why he decided to bring it up now when she was so vulnerable. The man held her hand tightly, as if trying to convey all his support and confidence, letting her know that it didn't matter what happened in the past. What mattered was that they could be together and support each other. The girl began to remember the most difficult moments of her life with her family, how they hurt her, and each of these memories left an indelible mark on her heart, like an icy blow that is difficult to forget. When she was still a child, she once lost consciousness, and upon waking up, found herself at a mountain house completely alone. There was no one around, she was left alone, with the cold and emptiness which seemed unbearable and endless. The little girl, all red from the cold and the snow that was falling inexorably, was forced to live alone in a small house where she was given food, but no one came. No one was interested in her fate, and loneliness became her only friend. Liarte explained that they probably didn't want to kill her then, but simply tried to hide the shame of their family from prying eyes, which is why the noblewoman found herself in such terrible isolation, forgotten and abandoned, like unwanted cargo. Face became serious, and cruel anger at his beloved's family, reflected in his gaze, and his eyebrows furrowed, betrayed his deep sympathy and desire to protect her, despite all the pain she had gone through. With cold indifference, Liarte confessed that she would once have preferred to remain in that secluded mountain house in the snowy expanses than to return to her family, who had never given her love and left her feeling unwanted and rejected like an alien. With pain in her voice, she added that she was often punished without reason, both morally and physically, and every day brought new trials, turning her life into a continuous struggle for recognition and love that did not exist. The man listened attentively, feeling his heart squeeze with pain for her suffering, realizing that before Liarte really dreamed of becoming a part of their family, striving to deserve their love and attention, but her efforts were in vain. But now Liarte no longer cared about her father and brothers. She did not want to see them, did not want to return to that atmosphere where she was not appreciated and loved, where her feelings did not matter. Mikkel could not stand it, and feeling how his heart responded to her pain, suddenly hugged the aristocrat tightly, trying to give her at least a little comfort and peace at this moment when her soul was full of fear and uncertainty. Sincerely, with deep determination in his voice, Mikkel promised that he would free his beloved from the influence of her family, give her a chance for real freedom, where she would be happy without fear and pain. He held her tenderly in his arms in the dark corridor, his hands gently but firmly squeezing her shoulders, as if trying to convey to her all his strength and confidence, so that she would finally feel the support she had dreamed of and sought for so long. Liarte closed her eyes, surrendering completely to the trust of the man, feeling how his closeness gave her the long-awaited peace and protection, as if she had found shelter in his arms, where she could finally be herself without fear and doubt. With a slight blush on her cheeks, she thanked the guy for his support, the feminine voice sounding warm and sincere, filling the air with the gratitude she felt for his attention care and the tenderness he gave her. Suddenly pulling away from him, the lady looked at the man, and he, sensing her change in mood, asked what she would like to do after they ran away together and started a new life. Liarte happily said that she had long dreamed of seeing the sea, feeling its breath, and seeing the endless horizons that she often thought about in moments of loneliness. Mikhail confidently promised that he would definitely open up to her the breathtaking landscapes and wonderful views that she so deserved, so that her dreams of true happiness would become reality, and she could finally feel the fullness of happiness that she had dreamed of for so long. Meanwhile, the men of Elheim stopped at the locked door, behind which the spirit of water hid. They looked at each other, preparing to enter, unaware that behind this door were not only answers, but also unknown dangers that could change everything. One of them grabbed the door handle, and the boys immediately realized that the door was open, as if someone already knew of their approach. Such a sense of wariness filled the air, as if they were being expected, prepared to meet something unknown. Meanwhile, they moved forward step by step, passing through a dark, almost living corridor in which there was no sound, no light, only a foggy atmosphere, as if the place itself guarded its ancient secrets and inhabitants. The Duke froze in place, his gaze stopping on the boy who was slowly swimming in the clear water, representing not just a living creature, but a mysterious spirit once imprisoned in a crystal, but now awakened, waiting for its new owner. The young man, with deep respect and reverence, bowed before the majestic king of spirits, whose eyes illuminated the space around him, and with determination declared that they had brought the chosen one for him, the one who would become the new master and friend of the spirit of water. The water spirit, awakening from a long sleep, faintly cleared his eyes, and they began to open slowly, as if he were returning to life, ready to appreciate those who had come and brought him a new owner for further union. Looking at the man who was brought to him, the boy, with a confused expression on his face, quietly said that he expected to see a completely different owner, and that this chosen one was completely unsuitable to be the owner of such a powerful spirit. The men froze, looking at each other in confusion, not knowing what exactly they had done wrong. Their faces were full of confusion, and sweat began to appear on their foreheads as they began to realize that things had not gone as they had planned. With anger like a storm, the spirit of water rose into the air, and around him waves swirled like a reflection of his rage, pumping in a circle and showing all his power and desire for revenge, which grew stronger with each passing moment. The spirit's eyes turned white, filled with insane anger and indignation, because he could not understand how an unawakened and alien person could claim to be his owner and violate the sacred laws of their world. Linricious himself stood frozen in shock and bewilderment as the king of magic revealed that he was not awakened and could not be its master. This revelation was a blow that shattered all Hope's dreams and carefully laid plans for the future. Rain fell from the sky, seeming to merge with the dark clouds that completely covered the noble's estate. The sky seemed to reflect the fury of the water spirit, hiding everything in darkness and causing the earth to tremble from the approaching disaster. The Spirit King muttered indignantly that such an insignificant being as Leonricious could not awaken him from his sleep, and this only confirmed that he did not deserve the power and respect that the spirit was willing to grant. The boy, realizing that he had been deceived, began to cast a spell in rage, summoning a magic ball filled with anger. He was ready to avenge his injustice and punish those who dared to misuse his powers. Lightning bolts burst from his hands, and the water began to strike like blows each moment, bringing closer the terrible punishment that the spirit was going to inflict on his enemies, believing that death was the only way to restore justice. The Duke, frightened and panicked, shouted, trying to convey to everyone that they did not understand what they had done wrong, and that they had no intention of deceiving the spirit because it was all an accidental misunderstanding that could lead to disaster. The boy, the King of Water, realized that they had brought him the wrong person, who was completely random, and according to his words, it became clear that the choice was wrong. But despite this, he also felt that somewhere nearby was the awakened one who was supposed to become his owner. He felt her presence in the air, subtle, almost elusive, but real. And although his mind was still in confusion, he already knew that it was this woman hiding somewhere nearby who was to become his true master and friend. The Duke, realizing the seriousness of the situation, could not go against the will and desire of the King of Spirits. He bowed deeply, promising to do whatever he wished, hoping in this way to avoid the wrath and disappointment of the powerful being. After this conversation, all the awakened ones from the Elhim family began to be brought to the Water King, but none of them were the ones who could become the true owner of the crystal, as the boy expected, leaving everyone confused and disappointed. The head of the family sat in his office, his face expressing confusion and disappointment. He could not understand why his son, Leonricious, did not become the chosen owner of the water crystal, despite all the efforts and hopes put into this choice. The son stood before him, discussing what could have led to such a mistake, discussing why their lineage was unable to deliver to the spirit of water, the very chosen one he had sought for so long among all the members of their family. Leonricious stood to the side, silent, his face twisted in disappointment and anger, for he had never become the chosen one he had dreamed of being, and his plans and hopes had been dashed, leaving him in a state of crushed despair. His brother tried to calm the boy down, assuring him that despite everything, he would still become the Duke of their family, even if he was not awakened, and that this failure did not determine his future destiny and his role in their family. Thunderion, having collected all his thoughts, resolutely prepared to return to the imperial palace, full of intentions and decisions that needed to be made in order to establish further relations with the authorities and continue his fateful mission. Suddenly breaking the silence, a servant entered the Duke's office and loudly announced that Mr. Birch soon intended to leave the Empire, and this unexpected turn of events took everyone by surprise. Leonricius listened to this statement in silence, standing to the side, absorbed in his own thoughts, trying to comprehend what was happening. Questions that had no simple answers were spinning in his head, and his feelings were filled with doubts and worries. The knight devoted to his master accompanied him to the carriage, which was standing on the street, and as soon as they approached, the sun was already low, painting the sky in the warm shades of sunset, which only enhanced the atmosphere of inevitability and farewell. The agitated guard, noticing the unusual haste, anxiously asked the gentleman if it was too early for them to leave this place, since they still had time, and perhaps it was worth waiting a little longer before making final decisions. Holding the white fox in his hands, Mikael confidently stated that since the curse had been lifted, they no longer had a reason to remain here. He noted that they should now return home and begin preparing for the upcoming events that required their attention and action. When asked what they were preparing for, Birch briefly replied that they were awaiting the arrival of the lovely Liarte, who was to play an important role in their further plans and perhaps be the key to their future success. Suddenly, as if from nowhere, Leonricius appeared, who had come to personally see off a nobleman he knew. His face was devoid of emotion, and there was not the slightest sign of friendship between them, and their gazes met, and everything around seemed cold and tense. Mikael, despite the coldness of the moment, smiled and said that it was a great honor for him that Elheim himself had come to see him off to the carriage, fully aware of the significance of this gesture. Stroking the fox, who had settled comfortably in his arms, the nobleman added mockingly that thanks to the Duke's family, he had never been bored a day slightly, implying that his life with them was full of surprises and thrills that did not leave him indifferent. Irritated without hiding his feelings, Leonricius asked sharply if Bircha had taken the animal with him, not understanding why he could not keep his oddities to himself. His voice sounded firm, as if there was hostility hidden in it. Mikael proudly replied that he always takes everything that belongs to him, including this animal, and his words sounded with a double meaning, as a hint that he takes not only things, but also something more, reserving his right of ownership. Having sat down in the carriage, the boy, already ready for the further journey, said goodbye to the Duke's son, hoping that their paths would cross again, and that they would be able to meet again in the future, despite all the difficulties that life brought. Leonricius, unable to bear it, looked away, and rudely replied that he did not want to meet Mr. Birch anymore, as did his sister, while his words sounded cold and his voice showed hostility that could no longer be hidden. Mikael, despite the harshness of his answer, only smiled slyly, realizing that their meeting would still be inevitable in the future, and his words contained confidence that fate would connect their paths more than once despite all attempts to avoid it. Several months had passed since Birch's departure, and the lady sat on the bed, bored, and thinking about how empty her life had become. Such silence around filled the space with a sense of loss and loneliness. The noblewoman happily settled into her new room, which her brother had given her as a gift, replacing the old cage, which had lost its former beauty, with a magnificent golden one with an exquisite pattern. It was not just a room, but a real masterpiece. The interior of the room was filled with an atmosphere of refined luxury, expensive furniture made with impeccable taste, organically combined with large windows through which a magnificent view of the garden opened up. They filled the room with light, creating an atmosphere of tranquility. Suddenly breaking the silence, a man entered the room, his boots making a soft thud on the red carpet. His steps were confident, and the air around him was filled with anticipation, as if he were a man who brought with him important news or change. Liarte did not want to look at the guest who had just arrived, and without hiding her irritation, rudely asked why he had come to her, not paying attention to his noble title or the circumstances of his visit. Leonricius, slightly surprised by this cold reception, calmly asked whether he should not have had a special reason for visiting his sister, since a visit to her was in fact a normal family matter that did not require justification. The girl remained silent, unwilling to engage in conversation, and her brother, realizing her reserve, decided to change the subject, asking if she would like anything special when she came of age, as if this was her only chance to feel attention. Liarte, unable to restrain herself, sharply responded that this ceremony would be significant only for him, but not for her, and would not be the milestone she had once expected, since her view of it all was full of alienation and disappointment. The man noticed with irritation how often the lady looked out the window, as if her thoughts were far away, and she wanted to escape from her home, to get away from everything that kept her here, from family obligations and mental slavery. The aristocrat did not object, just sitting silently. Her face remained expressionless, and her eyes filled with inner pain did not give in to any words, because she herself did not know how to cope with this feeling. Linretius, understanding the woman's silence with mockery and anger on his face, declared that his sister would never be able to escape from their family. He would not allow this because her place was here, and her desires meant nothing to him. The lady clutched the fabric of the bed in her hands, her fingers trembling with despair and helplessness, and her inner world was so badly destroyed that every thought became painful. A melancholy boiled in her chest that could not be satisfied by words or time. But despite all the hardships, she was consoled by the memory of Birch, who promised to free her from the shackles of her family, to give her the long-awaited freedom that she dreamed of so much, and perhaps to become her salvation in this cold and merciless world, full of fear and loneliness. The sun was shining brightly, the weather was fine outside, and the estate was silent, as if the whole world held its breath. The sky was clear and cloudless, and the birds singing their trills seemed to symbolize the free life she had dreamed of for so long. The princess walked along the stone corridors of the castle, looking for a certain person, not paying attention to the bright sunlight that penetrated every corner of the palace and reflected off the cold walls, creating an atmosphere of peace and solitude. She was looking for a guy named Thunderian, turning her head in different directions, with a slight grumble that her search was dragging on, and she couldn't figure out where he could have disappeared to in this huge building crowded with corridors. And suddenly, as if from nowhere from the water that appeared in the palace courtyard, the man she was looking for appeared with a smile that unexpectedly, for her, caused a little fear and surprise that left no room for doubt. The girl, sighing irritably, began to complain that she had been looking for him for so long, but suddenly, under the influence of his attentive gaze, something inside her changed, and she stopped feeling how his gaze had attracted her attention, and he froze, unable to look away. At this time, in the distance near the stairs stood the crown prince, hidden in a mysterious figure under a cloak, his gaze directed towards the girl, but his true intentions remained hidden behind a mask of silence and a mysterious shadow. Following the heir to the throne, the man turned around, noticing that someone was watching him closely. The man's gaze was full of bewilderment because he did not expect to be watched, and this caused him some anxiety. The princess, not paying attention to those around her, continued to enthusiastically tell the news about the new servant who had just arrived at the palace. Her words sounded with slight delight, as if this information was extremely important and interesting for everyone. Suddenly, her interlocutor, without saying a word, disappeared into thin air, and the girl shuddered in surprise because his disappearance was a rude gesture on his part, as if he was not interested in her conversation, and decided to leave without explaining the reasons. The road leading to the dungeon was winding and dangerous, and the stairs became steeper, creating a sense of mystery and mysticism. The walls were hidden in semi-darkness. Only dim torches illuminated the way, giving this place a special atmosphere of fear and anticipation. The man who accompanied the prince reminded that Linretius will soon come of age, and a ceremony will be held in his honor, symbolizing an important moment in his life when he officially enters adulthood. The departing ruler, recalling this, noted that the nobleman would come of age in just 3 days, and his sister would probably be happy to hear this news, because she had been waiting for this important event in her brother's life for a long time. They stopped in front of a large door, in the center of which was depicted a red circle, as if symbolizing something hidden that was about to be revealed. The whole atmosphere contained a sense of the importance of what was about to happen. The door in front of them opened, and the cloaked stranger, with a shocked expression on his face, froze in place, watching as the light from within blinded him, engulfing everything around him in its bright radiance. He could not believe what was happening there. There, inside in the light, was the other half of the Spirit King, a black lady flying in the air. The demonic energy that emanated from her was palpable, as if the darkness itself was enveloping the entire space around, and this darkness penetrated into the very depths of their consciousness. Her beauty was incredible, like the embodiment of the night. Her black hair fell on her shoulders, and the dark makeup only emphasized the mystery of her face, and her eyes were closed, as if she was immersed in a deep, unearthly sleep. Standing frozen before the mistress of spirits, the boys could not help but be captivated by her beauty. At that moment, Everything around them disappeared, and the world seemed dark and silent, absorbed by her mysterious presence, as if the universe itself had stopped moving. Obsessed with an obsession, the prince muttered that his true desire was to unite the two disparate parts of the Spirit King, to restore him to his former integrity, and then to completely take possession of his power, subordinating it to his will, and turning it into an unquestionable instrument of power. With a wild, almost insane grin, he added that when the plan became reality, the power of the imperial family would grow to unprecedented heights, allowing it to rule undividedly, suppressing any threat, and erasing the boundaries of what was permitted. The emperor's companion, long accustomed to obeying without question, merely nodded silently, accepting this daring plan without objection, without even trying to comprehend its possible consequences. Taking the bottle that his loyal servant had handed him, the heir, with a greedy gleam in his eyes, intended to personally collect magic from the Queen of Spirits, not wanting to trust such an important task to anyone else. With a grin full of self-confidence, the future ruler of the empire coldly remarked that his scarlet eyes made him special, and therefore the curse of the awakened had no power over him, unlike other mortals. The man began to collect dark, sinister energy in a glass vessel, filling it with his will, and directing it to the implementation of insidious plans that could change the course of history. A thick, gloomy darkness, like a living creature, gushed into the bottle, mesmerizingly shimmering in its cold walls, as if fate itself was watching what was about to happen. For anyone who did not have red eyes, this darkness was deadly. It either destroyed their minds, plunging them into madness, or mercilessly took away their life, leaving behind only emptiness. Having filled the bottle to the brim, the prince muttered with a satisfied grin that this amount was more than enough to carry out his plan, after which he confidently headed for the exit, not doubting his superiority. On the way, casting a thoughtful glance at his companion, he asked what he thought of Mr. Birch, as if testing his thoughts, or hinting at something more hidden behind this seemingly innocent question. At this time, Thundrion, using magic to remain unnoticed, invisibly, watched what was happening. He managed to uncover a terrible secret. The prince was hiding the second part of the King of Spirits in the basement, hiding it from everyone, waiting for the right moment for his dark plans. There was only one day left until the coming-of-age ceremony, and the mansion was drowning in anticipation of the upcoming event. And above it, a cloudless blue sky stretched out, as if the universe itself was holding its breath before the inevitable. Thundrion was deeply shocked to realize that his family had still not been able to find the owner of the crystal that contained the spirit, the one destined to control its power. In a spacious room, men gathered discussing who could be the very person capable of subjugating the King of Water to his will, because not only the fate of the crystal, but also the balance of the entire world depended on this. Suddenly, their conversation was interrupted by Leonrecius, who with a cold expression on his face asked a question that made everyone wary. What were they going to do with the maiden Liarte when she came of age and became part of their games of fate? The owner of the house said indifferently that if Liarte turned out to be of no use to their family, he would get rid of her, without regret throwing her away like an unnecessary object that had no use. However, upon hearing his own son's firm objection to such a cruel decision, the master of the house suddenly froze, stunned by the unexpected audacity. He could not even imagine that the one who had always submitted to his will would dare to dispute his words. Leonrecius, however, remained unmoved, his voice confident and firm, as he declared that he intended to keep his sister close to him, not allowing her to disappear from his life, as if it were his personal right. Then the old man frowned, remembering that no matter how much they wanted it, otherwise they had no right to keep Liarte in the family if she herself decided to leave, because her fate should belong to her alone. With a rage that boiled inside like a flame ready to burst out, the boy repeated over and over in his head the words of his father, who once, with unshakable confidence, declared that Liarte had always belonged only to him, as if it were just soulless property. While one of the bards froze in deep shock, the other, namely Thundrion, only laughed and noted that if she dared to disobey, then there was no need to think long, because the most effective way to return to obedience would be to teach a harsh lesson. The guy spoke about the lady so coldly and indifferently that it seemed as if he did not see in her a living person endowed with feelings and will, but only a soulless thing, and was still convinced that Leonrecius would inevitably become the full owner of the spirit crystal. However, earlier, the King of Spirits declared with unshakable confidence that his true master would be a completely different person. And despite all efforts, none of the contenders could change his decision, as if fate itself had long ago determined his choice. Looking away, the blue-eyed man involuntarily plunged into memories of how the capricious and unapproachable water crystal rejected each member of their family time after time, as if testing their strength and not wanting to accept anyone from the family. But among the many people whose names were spoken, only one did he call a fake, the one who bore the name Linricius, as if this name were a curse rejected not only by fate, but by the very essence of the crystal. The night enveloped the mansion with its mysterious blanket, the stars scattered across the bottomless sky, and the darkness, like a living creature, carefully penetrated every corner, filling the space with a sense of mystery and hidden secrets. The lady who stepped out for an evening stroll was dressed in an elegant dark dress, her steps echoing on the cool stone slabs as she walked leisurely through the winding corridors, as if lost in thought. Tomorrow was to be the most important ceremony to mark her brother's coming of age, and Liart decided that she needed to hear every word to free herself from any doubts before her own departure. The sweet girl, running swiftly across the palace square with quiet steps that barely touched the floor, felt her heart beat faster, and her thoughts rushed forward in search of answers that could change her destiny. The noblewoman stopped right at the door, behind which the mysterious stone of the spirit of water was hidden, as if unable to take the next step. The lady stood before a riddle that beckoned her to which an unknown force drew her, as if fate itself called her to unravel this ancient secret. The lady, hesitantly stretching out her hand to the door handles, felt her heart sink with excitement and fear. She did not dare to open these mysterious gates that stood before her, as if hiding behind them something important and unknown that could change her destiny. But suddenly, the doors swung open of their own accord, and a bright light poured out of the darkness, filling everything around, as if inviting her to enter. It pulled her towards itself, enveloping her. And all that was left was to succumb to this mysterious and alluring light, not realizing what was waiting beyond the threshold. The lady took the first step inside, and her steps echoed dully, breaking the deep silence, as she alone continued to move into the unknown, engulfed in darkness that hid from her all the mysterious secrets of the mystical space. When she looked up, she noticed a boy floating and sleeping in the air like a ghost. He was the spirit of water, his subtle presence filling the space with a mysterious calm feeling, as if he were part of the world itself. In some ways, he reminded her of that same man from her past life, that mysterious man who called her at the moment when she was on the verge of death, leaving an indelible mark and an unusual feeling in her heart. Liarte's eyes widened in surprise, and she took a step back as the boy finally woke up, his eyes full of determination, as if he had just returned from a long journey, ready to begin a new stage. With a gentle smile, the spirit extended his hand to the girl, and like a prophecy uttered the words she had been waiting for, so long, as if he was sure that her long-awaited return to his world had finally happened. He called her his mistress, the one with whom he had once made some mysterious pact, promising her not only an eternal presence, but also a deep affection that would give him strength and meaning, filling the emptiness in this world, and filling his life with a new purpose. The sweat running down her face showed her incomprehension, as the beauty stated with determination that they had never made any agreement, and her eyes were full of doubt and bewilderment at his words. However, the Water King, being stubborn, confidently stated that the deal had indeed taken place, and at that moment the maiden's hand suddenly glowed, her skin turning a mysterious blue hue, forming a pattern like a symbol associated with ancient powers. The lady shuddered, unable to take her eyes off her hand, which suddenly began to glow with strange patterns. It seemed as if the universe itself had decided to awaken forgotten connections and reveal long-hidden secrets of her past, making her heart beat faster. The Spirit King, noticing her confusion, explained that this was the very sign with which he had marked his mistress in a past life, in order to find her in the event of reincarnation, and now this symbol had appeared again as the key to their destiny. The aristocrat remembered her previous owner of the crystal, who was also a lady, and old images flashed through her memory, but at the same time so familiar and full of unsolved mysteries. Reaching out her hand, Liarte realized with surprise that all this might not be a coincidence, and whether it was the reincarnation of its first owner brought back to life through her was a question she could not ignore. The spirit answered in the affirmative, and then added that in addition to the memories of the beauty, he wanted to avenge her and her family, especially for the rudeness with which she had been treated by those who had once considered themselves superior to her. The boy laughed with a grin at the men who claimed that Leonricius was his owner, but in fact, he knew that he was only a fake, a futile attempt to replace the true master of his destiny. The lady indignantly stopped the guy when he suggested destroying her enemies, not realizing how severe the consequences of such actions could be, and how much pain is hidden in revenge, which only leads to new wounds. Liarte carefully asked the Spirit King to promise her that he would not tell anyone about their meeting, because the very next day, she was going to leave her home, leaving everything behind, to go into the unknown. The spirit, with slight regret, admitted that he would like to go with her to leave this house, but long ago it was divided into two parts, and if he followed her, the seal of peace that held the balance in this place would be destroyed. Intrigued, Liarte asked what exactly the seal was, not quite understanding its meaning, but feeling that it might be important to their future, her heart filled with anxiety. Suddenly, hearing a familiar voice behind her, she involuntarily shuddered, turning around, and her gaze met with the one who unexpectedly appeared in the shadows, breaking her concentration and immersed thoughts. The water spirit, realizing that their paths might diverge forever, cautiously bid farewell to the lady, wishing her happiness in her upcoming journey, even if she was about to leave this world behind and set off into the unknown. The girl, with a light sigh, said goodbye to her new friend, expressing gratitude for all the warm words and support, and then with determination in her heart, headed for the door, ready to leave this place behind, feeling how each step took her further and further away from her home. The long-awaited day of the ceremony arrived, and the bright rays of the sun, like fiery arrows, fiercely penetrated the hall, filling it with warmth and light, as if the rays themselves became part of this majestic celebration, illuminating every detail and creating a festive atmosphere. The nobles gathered in the great hall, eagerly participating in the dances, exchanging smiles and glances, emphasizing the solemnity of the moment, when each of them felt like a part of this majestic ceremony. Liarte, dressed in a new modest dress, stood to the side, not drawing unnecessary attention to herself, her gaze directed into the void while she tried to find her place in this world, not stopping there. Leonricius smugly declared to his brother that this ceremony was of great importance, not only to him, but to his sister, as well, emphasizing the importance of the moment for both family honor and their future. The girl was also assigned knights who were to watch her every move closely, so as not to allow her to interfere with the ceremony or leave the scene despite her own doubts or desires. Leonricius cast a suspicious glance at his sister and said with a slight reproach that she was too often immersed in thoughts about all sorts of nonsense, as if she did not understand the seriousness of what was happening around her. Viamine was adamant that they had no right to keep the girl in the family against her will, even though their intentions were purely out of concern and respect for tradition. The girl was an adult, and her freedom of choice must be respected. Leonricius, with a mocking smile on his lips and a cold evil in his gaze, sarcastically asked his brother, since when he began to consider Liarte part of their family, clearly emphasizing his disdainful dissatisfaction with such a decision. The boy, horrified by his words like a rat, instantly changed his mind. Turning pale, he hurried to apologize to his brother, feeling fear grip him and realizing that he was trapped in his own words. Liarte stood in the shadows, not saying a word, her gaze downcast and her head bowed, the noble woman silently enduring her fate, feeling the weight of the guards that stood nearby, not giving her the slightest chance of freedom. In the depths of his mind, Leonricius scorned his poor sister, believing that her only worthy place in this world was to remain in his shadow humbly and meekly, as a shadow of his power. Suddenly, his attention was drawn to the princess, who greeted him with restraint and politeness, breaking the silence, and her gesture became unexpected and noticeable among the general atmosphere of tension, attracting Leonricius's gaze. The lady, all in a delicate pink dress, with golden curly hair and a sweet smile, congratulated him on his coming of age. Her graceful appearance attracted attention and created an atmosphere of nobility and sophistication. Leonricius accepted the congratulations with a cold smile, realizing how important it was to cement this moment and enter into a marriage alliance with a royal person, because such a step could provide him with support and strengthen his position in society. The princess could not take her eyes off the handsome man, Her heart was filled with hope that the wedding between them would take place as soon as possible, and she looked at him boldly, filled with anticipation that their future was just around the corner. However, besides his beloved, the man was also worried about the fate of his sister. He turned his gaze to her, worried that she might leave, not sharing his decision, and wanting to leave everything behind, leaving him alone in this world. Liarte met the tall young man's gaze, and her eyes, full of determination and confidence, responded to his gaze as if conveying all her strength, her readiness to accept any trials, and go to the end despite all obstacles. She desperately hoped that Mikhail would keep his promise and come for her to save her, because only he could give her freedom and the opportunity to choose her own path, and her heart fluttered in anticipation of that long-awaited moment. The Duke, absorbed in conversation with representatives of another aristocracy, laughed easily at other people's jokes, enjoying the moment, not suspecting that just a moment later, his attention would be attracted by something more important. Suddenly, he was distracted by a servant, who, kneeling down loudly, announced that an unfamiliar carriage had arrived uninvited, which caused considerable concern, since no one expected guests to appear under such circumstances. The nobleman shuddered at the thought that the person who had arrived might be Mr. Birch himself, whose name was the subject of many rumors, and his heart skipped a beat when he realized the importance of this unexpected visit. Soon indeed, Mikhail entered the hall, and behind him, relentlessly following, walked the faithful knight. His shadow seemed inseparable from the master, which only emphasized their unity and strength at this moment. Aristocrat walked slowly across the sparkling marble, his white shoes made with exquisite taste, reflecting the light like rays of the sun, creating a sense of lightness and harmony in his movements. With a slight sigh and a barely noticeable smile on his face, Mikhail felt relieved, realizing that the banquet was not yet over, for he was so afraid of being late and ruining the important event for which everyone had prepared so carefully. The imperial family was in complete shock when they saw Mr. Birch, and what was most surprising was that he stood before them not blind, which was a real shock for everyone who considered his fate to be sealed. The crown prince was stunned, as it seemed impossible to lift the curse that held Lord Birch captive without awakening his magical power, and he did not know how it could be done so suddenly. The Duke, seeing an uninvited guest in his house, could not restrain himself and cried out indignantly because the appearance of this man in his domain at such a moment was extremely inappropriate and threatening to his entire family and position. Pointing his trembling finger at the man, the old man declared with anger and determination that he must bear full responsibility for his action, which was not only impudent but also unacceptable under the circumstances. The nobleman, holding his breath and extending his hand forward, explained that he had only returned to collect what he had left there and had no intention of causing trouble or disturbing the peace that had been established there. Leon Ricius, completely at a loss to understand what he could have left in the aristocrat's house, wondered how an insignificant item could be so important that he would return for it at this moment, despite the complexity of the situation. Liarte's eyes widened, looking at her guest in shock, realizing that he had kept his promise and had indeed come for her, as he had said, while every part of her soul trembled with excitement and surprise. With an inviting gesture and a soft smile on his lips, Mikhail extended his hand, offering the girl to take it as if it were a sign not only of greeting, but also of the possibility of a new, possibly important stage in their destiny. With a slight smile on his face, the handsome man invited Liarte to come with him to his duchy and stay there as if it was not just an offer, but an opportunity to start a new path together, far from the rest of the world. The man, stepping towards the girl, apologized for being late with sincere regret in his voice, and then suggested going to the sea where they could spend time away from worries, enjoying the peace and beauty of nature. Suddenly, as if out of nowhere, water magic stopped the aristocrat, preventing him from moving forward and getting closer to his companion, as if nature itself had decided to intervene at this moment, giving it extraordinary significance and a mystical atmosphere. It was Leon Ricius, unable to bear the thought that his sister, whom he considered his property, could be taken by another nobleman, and a storm raged in his soul, filled with a betrayal that he could not and would not allow. He wielded incredible water magic in his hands, wielding it with a masterful skill, as if he could command the elements themselves. His every gesture expressed impeccable determination and deep understanding, becoming a symbol of his strength and control. Suddenly, waves crashed down on the young man, They were rapidly approaching, carrying a deadly threat, and the water magic used against him was so powerful that it seemed capable of destroying everything in its path. But suddenly, as if by magic, another water element appeared out of nowhere. A huge wave, which in an instant protected the handsome man, stopping the deadly attack, and literally saving his life, as if magic itself decided to intervene at this decisive moment. The eldest son of the Duke's family, shocked by what was happening, exclaimed in disbelief. Whose magic was it so powerful and incredible that it was able to stop the attack directed against his brother and leave him alive? Leonricius stared at his sister in disbelief, as he realized that she wasn't as weak as he thought, and that her powers weren't limited to just physical endurance. She could control water like a master, something he had no idea about. Waves formed around Liarte, and she used the power of the water to protect her companion, her body radiating confidence and determination, as if the elements themselves were on her side, ready to rise up against anyone who dared to threaten her. Frowning, the girl firmly told her brother to behave properly, reminding him that it was important to observe etiquette and not attack others, even if the situation became tense, since her role was to be an example, not a source of conflict. Mikhail grinned widely as he watched his beloved stand up for herself and her companion, her confidence and fortitude only adding to his admiration, and he felt his pride in her grow with every action she took. The maiden headed in her direction, and when her lover grabbed her, she calmly explained that she was going on important business that remained to be completed in her home, and that this was necessary for her peace of mind and the completion of her obligations. Then, with a soft sigh, she added that they would soon be going to the birch house together. There was a quiet sadness in her voice, as if this decision was inevitable, but so necessary for their future, despite all the feelings she was leaving behind. Slowly, with evident reluctance, the lady let go of her companion's hand. Her heart was filled with doubts, but the decision had been made, and although she understood that it was all for the best, the pain of parting remained a heavy burden in her soul. The nobles, standing aside, discussed what had happened among themselves, in shock, passing on gossip that the maiden from the Duke's family was not as untalented as everyone thought, and that her strength and skills had remained hidden from prying eyes until now. Leonricius watched his relative go, realizing that he could no longer stop her. Emotions warred within him, but he understood that her choice was final, and all he could do was accept it, no matter how hard it was for him. The Duke, standing at a distance, wanted to say something to his daughter, to ask why she hid her gift, but was interrupted by her sharp and rude answer, which left him speechless, as if she was finally renouncing his authority. The lady calmly explained that she no longer belonged to this family, since she had become an independent and mature person, capable of determining her own destiny without burdening herself with old debts and obligations that no longer mattered to her. In her past life, she died because she was too eager to become part of the Elheim family. But now, having learned from bitter experience, she was not going to repeat that mistake and give up her freedom for the sake of alien expectations. Her brothers stood aside in shock, not believing their own eyes, unable to understand how this could happen, because Liarte seemed to have always been a part of their world, and now she stood before them completely different, independent and strong. Liarte had incredible strength. Her sense of the water around her was almost magical, and she had no intention of being anyone's thing anymore, but only following her path, which was now clear and full of determination. Having finished her speech, the beauty turned to her lover, quietly saying that she had completed all her business and that it was time to leave this house, which was no longer her home, but only a part of the past that she was leaving behind. Mikhail, obediently agreeing, looked at her with a smile, his heart filled with joy and pride for her, because he knew how difficult it was for her to take this step, and he was happy that she finally found her incredible freedom. The two of them left the room, and to their relief, no one tried to stop them. At that moment, they found themselves alone with their decision, and a new beginning, feeling free of everything that had previously tied them to the past. The forest, shrouded in silence and greenery, was filled with the calm sounds of nature, and the sun's rays brightly penetrated through the foliage, creating an atmosphere of peace and harmony, where everything around seemed ideal, and nothing could destroy this moment of peace. A carriage raced along a narrow path. The horses, like living creatures, rushed forward, their hooves lifting off the ground with a loud sound, leaving behind only a cloud of dust and wind filling the space with a feeling of speed and freedom. Mikhail, leaning against the window of the transport, thoughtfully looked away. His thoughts were occupied with how these freaks clung to Liarte, to the last trying to keep her in their bonds, not realizing that her time with them had long passed. The Duke, despite his former hatred for his daughter, did not want to let her go, especially when he learned that she was gifted and could control water. This knowledge only increased his fear and desire to keep her under his control. Leonritius, clutching his head in despair, was deeply distressed that the thing that had once belonged to him had slipped from his hands, and now his power over it was helpless, and all efforts to retain it were futile. The girl herself, looking out the window with interest, could not believe that she had finally left her home, which had always been a source of hatred for her, and was now setting off on a journey full of uncertainty and new opportunities. When Mikhail, tenderly adjusting a strand of her hair, asked her with a slight smile what she was feeling, the lady, smiling barely noticeably, replied that now everything had changed, and she could finally be herself, despite everything that was left behind, and that weighed heavily on her soul. The man, with a smile on his lips, confidently declared that he would do everything possible to help his beauty forget about all the horrors that she had to endure in her father's house, and promised to create a new world for her, full of peace and happiness. The guy, with determination in his voice, promised that from now on, he would always be there, ready to come to her aid and support her in any situation, no matter what she went through, and he would not leave her alone in difficult moments. Finally, they arrived at the appointed place, and with a slight smile, the guy asked if Liarte was ready to visit her new home, feeling the importance of this step for her life, because it was the beginning of something new and exciting. As soon as the carriage door swung open, a bright, blinding light poured out, illuminating everything around them, as if nature itself was welcoming them, creating an atmosphere of magic and a new beginning that left no room for doubt. An incredibly beautiful view of the sea opened up before them, the sunset filling the sky with warmth and beauty, and the waves playing on the surface of the water created an atmosphere of peace and tranquility, as if all of nature was in this moment. The girl smiled happily, feeling the gentle sea breeze on her face. She finally felt free, as if all her chains had been broken, and she could breathe deeply, enjoying this moment. The cool night enveloped her in a soft darkness, and the stars, like quiet lights, began to slowly flare up in the dark sky, while the clouds, slowly floating past, created mysterious shadows, as if the world itself was preparing to reveal new secrets. Liarte looked at the sea until late in the evening, without taking her eyes off its boundless surface, absorbed in its beauty, as if nature itself was enchanting her, inviting her to immerse herself in its endless expanses. But suddenly, she was pulled out of her thoughts by Mikhail, who reminded her that the sun had already set and that it was time to leave. He gently but persistently suggested that they return, as the night was getting colder, and they could not stay here for too long. The girl explained with a smile that she was simply enjoying the view of this amazing sea, which was so alive and real, unlike the pictures in the books. It was unlike anything she had seen before. It was truly exciting. The strong man blushed slightly, feeling the lady's grateful gaze on him. His heart was touched by this sincere confession, and he couldn't help but smile slightly, realizing how much her gratitude meant to him. They were standing together by the water, enjoying the quiet evening, when Bircha, looking at Liarte with a warm expression on his face, quietly admitted that he had missed her very much, her soft voice and everything that she brought into his life. The girl, without thinking, extended her hand towards the guy. Her gaze was full of tenderness and unexpressed longing, and with a slight sadness in her voice, she admitted that she also missed him, because despite the distance, she always felt him nearby. Their fingers intertwined, and as if by magic, a quiet but firm vow was heard, that from now on they would be inseparable, their hearts and souls forever linked, no matter what would happen in the future. The house was in complete disarray, with furniture, overturned things scattered everywhere, and an unsettling sense of recent chaos in the air left behind after events had suddenly spiraled out of control, leaving nothing but destruction. Leonritius sat on the floor, lost in dark thoughts, trying to figure out how he had ended up in this situation, unable to keep his sister by his side. And deep down, he felt that something had gone wrong as he had imagined. Quickly, in search of an explanation, he came to the conclusion that it was all the fault of Mr. Birch, that damned aristocrat, who had stolen his own sister, tearing her away from her family, and destroying everything he had tried to preserve. It all started back when a man, having secretly stolen a fox from a boy during a hunt, unwittingly became the reason for the gradual disintegration of the young man's world, as if this at first glance trifle entailed something great and inevitable, but hidden from view. The young man sat there, his head bowed, his thoughts overflowing, and at that moment he felt something breaking inside him, and events that he could not control continued to roll over him in waves. Suddenly, he noticed that his father was standing next to him, and his look, filled with the same bitterness and disappointment as his own, spoke of how hard they both were, experiencing the disgusting end of the ceremony, which left an indelible mark on their souls. The young man's brothers stood side by side, absorbed in the oppressive silence, each of them feeling that words had lost all meaning at that moment. And all were silent, as if afraid that any word would disturb the fragile calm that reigned around them. The Duke turned away abruptly, looked at his sons, and without emotion, ordered them to follow him, not allowing himself to stop any longer, or think about what had just happened, deciding that he had to move forward despite all the difficulties. They all approached the door behind which the crystal of the spirit of water lived, hoping to find out from it who was the real owner of this powerful creature that hid its secrets behind the walls of this ancient room. The hand reached out to the door, ready to open it, but despite all efforts, it remained motionless, as if the door itself was resisting, not wanting to reveal its secrets, hiding behind it something important and inaccessible to outsiders. Finally, with a soft creak, the door swung open, and a bright light burst forth from within, blinding in its radiance, as if the crystal of the water spirit itself was awakening, ready to share the truths that were stored within its depths. There, in the dark shadow of the ancient hall, the King of Spirits sat boredly on a stone, his eyes full of disappointment, because instead of his mistress, only fools had come, who could not appreciate the true value of this place and the power contained in this stone. The Duke, noticing the boy's depressed mood, tried to relieve the tension, and turned to the spirit with a request to show favor and tolerance, understanding how important it is to leave room for those who still strive to understand and know. The aristocrats, gathered in a circle, began to ask the spirit questions, trying to find out who in fact was the true heir of the owner of the crystal, because this secret was the key to unraveling the ancient power hidden behind the stone. The spirit interrupted the nobleman's speech. His voice became stronger and more confident, and he began to tell the story of the first owner of the stone, the one who opened the magical gates of water, connecting the two worlds, and granting the power that could change everything. When spirits were able to communicate freely with people, they entered into contracts with them, exchanging powers and knowledge, creating unique connections that enriched both worlds, strengthening their interconnection and harmonious existence. Those who made contracts with the Spirit King were called awakened, special people who possessed unique abilities and deep knowledge that opened up opportunities for them that were inaccessible to ordinary mortals. People and ghosts lived in harmony. Their relationship was strong and fruitful until one day a misfortune happened. One of the last spirits went mad, and the gates that connected the worlds were closed, leaving behind only emptiness and loss. Thunderion stopped in shock upon hearing about the Spirit Kings, his thoughts instantly returning to the prince he found in the basement. The same ghost that was connected to the Waterstone was there, and this discovery shook him to the core. It was known that the first owner of the Waterstone, like Liarte, could not awaken her power until she came of age, and this similarity in their fates made Thunderion's heart beat faster, as if a premonition of something important. The Duke, however, did not know this detail, and his face was distorted with shock when he learned that his hatred of his daughter was completely unfounded. She was innocent, and his prejudice prevented him from seeing the truth about her fate. The Spirit King, noticing the doubt in the people's eyes, grinned ominously, his eyes sparkling with cunning as they finally realized what they had lost. And perhaps this was only the beginning of the revelation of those secrets that had remained hidden for so long. The Spirit King, without hiding his contempt, pointed to the girl's velvet cloak, and with a poisonous grin called her companion nothing more than a shameless fake, as if his presence were only an extra burden on her path. The long-hidden secret has finally come to light. It turns out that Leonritius was the one who sucked all the power out of his mother, causing her death, and this left an indelible mark on his family, giving birth to a dark shadow. After this terrible youth was born, he became nothing but a hindrance to his sister, preventing her from developing completely absorbing attention and resources, leaving her in the shadow of his own actions and torments. Leon Ricious, overcome with rage, clenched his fists when he was forbidden to use water magic, and his heart filled with anger and despair, because this was the last thing that connected him to the ancient powers. Now that Liarte had left home, the water spirit had taken revenge by taking away the Elheim line's water magic, depriving them of that powerful gift, and the Elheim totem seemed to have become only a pitiful reflection of its former glory. The Duke, unable to believe the truth, began to laugh in madness, realizing that they had made a terrible mistake. They should have returned their daughter before it was too late, for now their family was left without power. The carriage rocked as it slowly passed through the streets, and the coachman, intently controlling the horse, continued on his way, oblivious to the world around him, while the city seemed unhurried, absorbed in its usual bustle. Liarte was dozing on the nobleman's shoulder, her body relaxed, as if she were half asleep, when he gently woke her up quietly, saying that they had finally arrived, as if to gently bring her back to reality. The lady blinked slowly, gradually, waking up, and her gaze remained clouded, as if she still felt the soft embrace of sleep on her, unwilling to let go of its cozy shadow that so gently held her, not allowing her to return to reality. After that, trying to clear her thoughts, the beauty turned her gaze to the window, curiously trying to understand where exactly they had arrived, wanting to know in what corner of this big world their long and tiring journey had ended. It was the Duchy of Birch, a stately place with a large house, a mansion that rose above the green expanses that surrounded it, like a reflection of the stability and strength of the family to which they now belonged. Like a true gentleman, the man extended his hand to his lady, helping her carefully descend from the carriage. His movements were so smooth and confident that she felt completely safe under his caring gaze. On the street, they were met by a handsome adult man with bright red eyes similar to Birch's. It was the father of the lady's beloved. His name was Carmen. The man looked confident and friendly, greeting the guests with warmth. Mikhail quietly whispered into the sweet Liarte's ear that his father had long wanted to meet her, and now finally this moment had come, as if their whole history had come to this important turn, where their paths crossed and began a new chapter. Liarte, slightly bowing her head, addressed the aristocrat with warmth and respect, thanking him for agreeing to receive her in his home, and her voice, full of sincere gratitude, reflected deep respect for his hospitality. But suddenly, her step was stopped by Mikhail, who with a slight smile noted that she shouldn't behave so formally and tensely, because at this moment it was much more important to show sincerity and warmth than to observe conventions. The boy's father confirmed his son's words with a friendly smile, adding that the right words and actions are always appreciated, especially when they come from someone who truly understands what gratitude and respect mean. Giving the lady a kiss on the hand, he expressed his deepest gratitude for saving his child, saying that he could not find enough words to thank her for this priceless act that changed their destinies. The noblewoman, shaking her head slightly, did not agree with his words, stating that in fact it was the man's son who helped her by giving her a new home and providing security, because without his help, she would not have been able to start a new life. The nobleman's father could not help but notice how his son looked at the young lady with a deep, almost intimate gaze, and in this gaze there was not only admiration, but also an unconscious desire to protect her, which was impossible to hide from those around him. Then, with a graceful movement of his hand, he invited the young couple into the house, inviting them to rest after their long and tiring journey, trying to create an atmosphere of comfort so that they could recuperate and feel completely comfortable. Liarte bowed her head in surprise when she heard herself called a benefactress, because these words seemed unexpected and excessively high for her modest actions, causing mixed feelings in her soul, misunderstanding, and slight embarrassment. For Liarte, where luxurious furniture and refined decor created an atmosphere of true comfort and peace, as if this corner was specially created for her rest and comfort. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door, and it was the servant whom Carmen had sent to the young lady to deliver an important message. His steps were quiet but confident, and his presence filled the room with a feeling of expectation. The door creaked open, and a bright light entered the space, enveloping the person entering, and then with grace, a stranger entered the room, bringing with him freshness and a slight sense of change. It was a beautiful maid, a maid with a soft and welcoming expression on her face. who introduced herself as Marilyn, confidently stating that from now on, she would take care of all of Liarte's needs, providing her with all the comfort she needed. In her past life, this maid was a brave warrior who fought hundreds of soldiers mercilessly and decisively, and her strength, bravery, and unwavering determination left an indelible mark in history as those who never retreated in the face of mortal danger. The maid, with a serious and confident expression, asked her mistress to take care of her, declaring that from now on, she would protect the noblewoman like a loyal guard ready to stand guard over her safety and eternal peace. Marilyn approached her lady with deep respect, slightly bowing her head, and in a soft but confident tone, informed her that her master had sent her here with a clear task: to take care of Liart, protect her from any dangers, and fulfill her duty. The leaves rustled quietly, the bushes swayed gently in the light breeze, and bright light poured from the greenhouse windows, filling the space with a warm glow and creating an atmosphere of comfort, peace, and serenity, as if time had slowed down here. The aristocratic father and son were having tea. They were sitting at a large table with 3 chairs, and the atmosphere was filled with easy conversation and family comfort, despite the slight tension that hung in the air. Mikhail, like a faithful dog, patiently and with a devoted look, waited for the appearance of his beloved. The man's eyes reflected impatience and excitement, because each of her appearances filled his heart with great joy. The man sipped his tea, thought for a moment, and with a slight smile suddenly declared that there were rumors that raising children was a useless occupation, which caused slight bewilderment in his interlocutor, who could not immediately understand how seriously this was said. Without a trace of embarrassment, the young man stated that it seemed that his parent had not tried hard enough, and there was a frank irony in his voice that made his interlocutors freeze in surprise and think about the audacity of his words, as if he ignored all conventions. The men turned sharply at the noise coming from the other side, and their gazes instantly became tense, as if they anticipated something unexpected that could disrupt the usual course of their conversation and introduce uncertainty into the atmosphere. Liarte stood before them, dazzling and elegant, dressed in a new dress, the blue and white shades of which resembled a fresh flower. Her beauty attracted all eyes, and her every step, like a dance, was filled with grace and charm. The noblewoman, with a slight bow and a soft look, asked forgiveness for being late, her voice sounding sincere and humble, as if she felt that even a minor delay required an explanation, and sought to smooth over any possible discontent. The head of the Birch family warmly invited the lady to sit at their table. His gesture was full of friendliness and hospitality, as if he wanted to create an atmosphere of comfort and respect where everyone would feel like an important part of this event. The aristocrats drank tea in the greenhouse, where the air was filled with the fragrance of flowers, and the maid standing nearby readily awaited any order, creating an atmosphere of refined tranquility and majestic solitude. The aristocrat, with obvious surprise, stopped in front of the table, unable to hide her admiration, looking at the many exquisite treats that were in front of her, as if this table was a true symbol of boundless hospitality and care for each guest. The desserts looked especially appetizing. Golden baked cakes decorated with cream beckoned with their appearance, promising an unearthly taste, and made you forget about all your worries for a moment of pleasure. Noticing that the beauty had not touched her food, Mikhail, with slight surprise, asked if she really didn't like the food, his voice sounding soft, but with a hint of concern, as if he himself was worried about her discomfort. The beauty, somewhat awkwardly, and with a slight blush on her cheeks, admitted that she had never seen such dishes, and therefore did not know how to eat them properly. Her words sounded sincere, and timidity was visible in her gaze. The men, stunned by her confession, froze in their chairs, unable to believe that the lady had never tasted sweets in her life, and their surprise was so strong that they could not immediately find the words to respond. Sympathy was easily reflected on Mr. Birch's face. His gaze was full of sadness and longing, as if he was worried about his beloved, and for a moment his heart sank, sharpening with deep inner pain and anxiety. However, hiding his sadness, he quickly changed his facial expression to a warm and friendly smile, promising the lady his full support, assuring her that he would always be there, ready to come to the rescue at any moment. First, he pointed his fork at the strawberry roll, which looked soft and delicious, its sweet aroma filling the air, as if inviting her to enjoy this treat. And he said with a smile that this delicacy was worth trying. Trying to offer her something tasty, Mikhail held out a piece of dessert on the cutlery, with a soft smile asking the lady to open her mouth and taste this delicacy. His voice was soft and a little playful, as always when he wanted to please her. The nobles smiled with interest and slight surprise as they watched the girl actually enjoy the sweetness, their gazes filled with approval, as if this moment had become a sign of her acceptance and comfort for them. Liarte smiled happily, her eyes shining with pleasure. She felt her heart filling with comfort and warmth, as if she had finally found a place where she was appreciated and where she could be herself. The evening sky was bathed in soft light, and from the windows on either side, golden light poured in as if moonlight was refracted in the glass, casting shadows, creating an atmosphere of mystical silence in the air, broken only by the crackling of the fire in the fireplace. The lady walking along the luxurious marble corridor walked confidently, accompanied by her maid, her gaze directed at the window where the twilight was just beginning to subside, and in her head were thoughts about the past day, full of important events that left a mark on her soul. Suddenly, in the midst of this silence, a piercing cry was heard, from which the noblewoman's heart sank and her body tensed, as if ready to react, and she instinctively turned around, trying to understand where this sound came from, which disturbed her peace. She turned back sharply, trying to figure out where the scream was coming from, but there was only emptiness before her eyes, and the silence seemed to swallow everything around, leaving only an uneasy feeling of ambiguity and uncertainty. Looking around in confusion, Liarte decided that perhaps she had only imagined it, and that it was nothing more than a figment of her imagination. But at that moment, her heart still remained gripped by an incomprehensible anxiety, as if something was wrong. However, the cry was repeated, shrill and alarming, causing the maid to ask her mistress why she had suddenly stopped, as if she had not heard this eerie sound that disturbed the silence of the night and awakened hidden fears. The maid, not hearing anything that was troubling the lady, confidently stated that there were no loud sounds, unlike her mistress, who clearly distinguished the cries of some kind of animal, perhaps occurring somewhere in the distance. The young maid, supporting her mistress by the waist, suggested that she go to her chambers to rest and relax after such a long and stressful day, as if understanding that Liarte needed time for herself to regain her strength. Liarte had no choice but to nod in response and lower her head, agreeing to the proposal, because the fatigue from daily worries and experiences overcame her, and peace and rest seemed necessary at this moment. Together with the maid, they continued their journey along the long, dark corridor, where the candlelight barely touched the walls and the shadows played on the stone slabs, as if hiding everything that was hidden in their depths, and the air was saturated with the cold of the night. But the screams did not stop growing louder and more frequent, like the sounds of wild nature pursuing their steps, and each new cry filled Liarte's heart with more and more anxiety, making her nervous and feeling that something terrible was about to happen. Carmen sat in his office late at night, reading documents, and fatigue, like a heavy weight, pressed on his shoulders. He stared at the mountain of papers, and thoughts consumed by anxiety hovered in his head like persistent shadows. The butler stood nearby quietly, awaiting orders, when the aristocrat, wearily speaking the words out loud, began to read out a letter that seemed to contain nothing but complaints and grievances, devoid of any hope for constructive dialogue. In the letter, the nobles demanded that Liarte return to her duchy, and with every word, Carmen's voice grew more and more irritated. It was too much. His resolve had finally been challenged, and demanding Liarte's return was only the last straw. The butler accepted the master's words with unconditional consent, claiming that the crown prince, as well as the entire imperial family, sincerely sought the downfall of the powerful Birch family, which in their opinion had become inevitable and necessary for the preservation of their power. With a slight smile, Carmen watched as the prince seemed to suddenly change his plans, and now his desire to marry Liarte became clear. This decision turned out to be quite intriguing, making everyone around guess what was behind such a move. It was a completely absurd delusion. After being treated so cruelly in the past, she could not even think about returning to the place where she had to endure such humiliating and painful moments, leaving them in the past forever. The letter, full of complaints and absurd demands, was thrown into the trash without hesitation, as not worth even the slightest attention, because it contained nothing but empty words and useless threats. The butler bowed with deep respect to his master, having received clear orders to no longer accept letters from aristocrats who were trying to return Liarte, which was unacceptable in the eyes of their family, and in particular the master himself. Before dismissing his servant, the man with a sinister smile on his face added with cold determination that if anyone still dared to continue sending letters, let them know. Carmen would personally deal with them breaking her arms. The nobleman, holding his breath and extending his hand forward, explained that he had only returned to collect what he had left there and had no intention of causing trouble or disturbing the peace that had been established there. Leon Riccius, completely at a loss to understand what he could have left in the aristocrat's house, wondered how an insignificant item could be so important that he would return for it at this moment, despite the complexity of the situation. Liarte's eyes widened, looking at her guest in shock, realizing that he had kept his promise and had indeed come for her, as he had said, while every part of her soul trembled with excitement and surprise. With an inviting gesture and a soft smile on his lips, Mikhail extended his hand, offering the girl to take it as if it were a sign not only of greeting, but also of the possibility of a new, possibly important stage in their destiny. With a slight smile on his face, the handsome man invited Liarte to come with him to his duchy and stay there as if it was not just an offer, but an opportunity to start a new path together, far from the rest of the world. The man stepping towards the girl apologized for being late with sincere regret in his voice, and then suggested going to the sea where they could spend time away from worries, enjoying the peace and beauty of nature. Suddenly, as if out of nowhere, water magic stopped the aristocrat, preventing him from moving forward and getting closer to his companion, as if nature itself had decided to intervene at this moment, giving it extraordinary significance and a mystical atmosphere. It was Leon Riccius, unable to bear the thought that his sister, whom he considered his property, could be taken by another nobleman, and a storm raged in his soul, filled with a betrayal that he could not and would not allow. He wielded incredible water magic in his hands, wielding it with a masterful skill, as if he could command the elements themselves. His every gesture expressed impeccable determination and deep understanding, becoming a symbol of his strength and control. Suddenly, waves crashed down on the young man. They were rapidly approaching, carrying a deadly threat, and the water magic used against him was so powerful that it seemed capable of destroying everything in its path. But suddenly, as if by magic, another water element appeared out of nowhere. A huge wave, which in an instant protected the handsome man, stopping the deadly attack and literally saving his life, as if magic itself decided to intervene at this decisive moment. The eldest son of the Duke's family, shocked by what was happening, exclaimed in disbelief. Whose magic was it so powerful and incredible that it was able to stop the attack directed against his brother and leave him alive? Leon Riccius stared at his sister in disbelief, as he realized that she wasn't as weak as he thought, and that her powers weren't limited to just physical endurance. She could control water like a master, something he had no idea about. Waves formed around Liarte, and she used the power of the water to protect her companion, her body radiating confidence and determination, as if the elements themselves were on her side, ready to rise up against anyone who dared to threaten her. Frowning, the girl firmly told her brother to behave properly, reminding him that it was important to observe etiquette and not attack others, even if the situation became tense, since her role was to be an example, not a source of conflict. Mikhail grinned widely as he watched his beloved stand up for herself and her companion, her confidence and fortitude only adding to his admiration, and he felt his pride in her grow with every action she took. The maiden headed in her direction, and when her lover grabbed her, she calmly explained that she was going on important business that remained to be completed in her home, and that this was necessary for her peace of mind and the completion of her obligations. Then, with a soft sigh, she added that they would soon be going to the birch house together. There was a quiet sadness in her voice, as if this decision was inevitable, but so necessary for their future, despite all the feelings she was leaving behind. Slowly, with evident reluctance, the lady let go of her companion's hand. Her heart was filled with doubts, but the decision had been made, and although she understood that it was all for the best, the pain of parting remained a heavy burden in her soul. The nobles, standing aside, discussed what had happened among themselves, in shock, passing on gossip that the maiden from the Duke's family was not as untalented as everyone thought, and that her strength and skills had remained hidden from prying eyes until now. Leon Riccius watched his relative go, realizing that he could no longer stop her. Emotions warred within him, but he understood that her choice was final, and all he could do was accept it no matter how hard it was for him. The Duke, standing at a distance, wanted to say something to his daughter, to ask why she hid her gift, but was interrupted by her sharp and rude answer, which left him speechless, as if she was finally renouncing his authority. The lady calmly explained that she no longer belonged to this family since she had become an independent and mature person, capable of determining her own destiny without burdening herself with old debts and obligations that no longer mattered to her. In her past life, she died because she was too eager to become part of the Elheim family, but now, having learned from bitter experience, she was not going to repeat that mistake and give up her freedom for the sake of alien expectations. Her brothers stood aside in shock, not believing their own eyes, unable to understand how this could happen, because Liarte seemed to have always been a part of their world, and now she stood before them completely different, independent, and strong. Liarte had incredible strength. Her sense of the water around her was almost magical, and she had no intention of being anyone's thing anymore, but only following her path, which was now clear and full of determination. Having finished her speech, the beauty turned to her lover, quietly saying that she had completed all her business and that it was time to leave this house, which was no longer her home, but only a part of the past that she was leaving behind. Mikhail, obediently agreeing, looked at her with a smile, his heart filled with joy and pride for her, because he knew how difficult it was for her to take this step, and he was happy that she finally found her incredible freedom. The two of them left the room, and to their relief, no one tried to stop them. At that moment, they found themselves alone with their decision, and a new beginning, feeling free of everything that had previously tied them to the past. The forest, shrouded in silence and greenery, was filled with the calm sounds of nature, and the sun's rays brightly penetrated through the foliage, creating an atmosphere of peace and harmony, where everything around seemed ideal, and nothing could destroy this moment of peace. A carriage raced along a narrow path. The horses, like living creatures, rushed forward, their hooves lifting off the ground with a loud sound, leaving behind only a cloud of dust and wind filling the space with a feeling of speed and freedom. Mikhail, leaning against the window of the transport, thoughtfully looked away. His thoughts were occupied with how these freaks clung to Liarte, to the last trying to keep her in their bonds, not realizing that her time with them had long passed. The Duke, despite his former hatred for his daughter, did not want to let her go, especially when he learned that she was gifted and could control water. This knowledge only increased his fear and desire to keep her under his control. Leonritius, clutching his head in despair, was deeply distressed that the thing that had once belonged to him had slipped from his hands, and now his power over it was helpless, and all efforts to retain it were futile. The girl herself, looking out the window with interest, could not believe that she had finally left her home, which had always been a source of hatred for her, and was now setting off on a journey full of uncertainty and new opportunities. When Mikhail, tenderly adjusting a strand of her hair, asked her with a slight smile what she was feeling, the lady, smiling barely noticeably, replied that now everything had changed, and she could finally be herself, despite everything that was left behind, and that weighed heavily on her soul. The man, with a smile on his lips, confidently declared that he would do everything possible to help his beauty forget about all the horrors that she had to endure in her father's house, and promised to create a new world for her, full of peace and happiness. The guy, with determination in his voice, promised that from now on, he would always be there, ready to come to her aid and support her in any situation, no matter what she went through, and he would not leave her alone in difficult moments. Finally, they arrived at the appointed place, and with a slight smile, the guy asked if Liarte was ready to visit her new home, feeling the importance of this step for her life, because it was the beginning of something new and exciting. As soon as the carriage door swung open, a bright, blinding light poured out, illuminating everything around them, as if nature itself was welcoming them, creating an atmosphere of magic and a new beginning that left no room for doubt. An incredibly beautiful view of the sea opened up before them, the sunset filling the sky with warmth and beauty, and the waves playing on the surface of the water created an atmosphere of peace and tranquility, as if all of nature was in this moment. The girl smiled happily, feeling the gentle sea breeze on her face. She finally felt free, as if all her chains had been broken, and she could breathe deeply, enjoying this moment. The cool night enveloped her in a soft darkness, and the stars, like quiet lights, began to slowly flare up in the dark sky, while the clouds slowly floating past created mysterious shadows, as if the world itself was preparing to reveal new secrets. Liarte looked at the sea until late in the evening, without taking her eyes off its boundless surface, absorbed in its beauty, as if nature itself was enchanting her, inviting her to immerse herself in its endless expanses. But suddenly, she was pulled out of her thoughts by Mikhail, who reminded her that the sun had already set and that it was time to leave. He gently but persistently suggested that they return, as the night was getting colder, and they could not stay here for too long. The girl explained with a smile that she was simply enjoying the view of this amazing sea, which was so alive and real, unlike the pictures in the books. It was unlike anything she had seen before. It was truly exciting. The strong man blushed slightly, feeling the lady's grateful gaze on him. His heart was touched by this sincere confession, and he couldn't help but smile slightly, realizing how much her gratitude meant to him. They were standing together by the water, enjoying the quiet evening, when Bircha, looking at Liarte with a warm expression on his face, quietly admitted that he had missed her very much, her soft voice and everything that she brought into his life. The girl, without thinking, extended her hand towards the guy. Her gaze was full of tenderness and unexpressed longing, and with a slight sadness in her voice, she admitted that she also missed him, because despite the distance, she always felt him nearby. Their fingers intertwined, and as if by magic, a quiet but firm vow was heard that from now on they would be inseparable, their hearts and souls forever linked, no matter what would happen in the future. The house was in complete disarray, with furniture, overturned things scattered everywhere, and an unsettling sense of recent chaos in the air left behind after events had suddenly spiraled out of control, leaving nothing but destruction. Leonretius sat on the floor, lost in dark thoughts, trying to figure out how he had ended up in this situation, unable to keep his sister by his side. And deep down, he felt that something had gone wrong as he had imagined. Quickly, in search of an explanation, he came to the conclusion that it was all the fault of Mr. Birch, that damned aristocrat, who had stolen his own sister, tearing her away from her family, and destroying everything he had tried to preserve. It all started back when a man, having secretly stolen a fox from a boy during a hunt, unwittingly became the reason for the gradual disintegration of the young man's world, as if this at first glance trifle entailed something great and inevitable, but hidden from view. The young man sat there, his head bowed, his thoughts overflowing, and at that moment he felt something breaking inside him, and events that he could not control continued to roll over him in waves. Suddenly, he noticed that his father was standing next to him, and his look, filled with the same bitterness and disappointment as his own, spoke of how hard they both were, experiencing the disgusting end of the ceremony, which left an indelible mark on their souls. The young man's brothers stood side by side, absorbed in the oppressive silence, each of them feeling that words had lost all meaning at that moment. And all were silent, as if afraid that any word would disturb the fragile calm that reigned around them. The Duke turned away abruptly, looked at his sons, and without emotion, ordered them to follow him, not allowing himself to stop any longer, or think about what had just happened, deciding that he had to move forward despite all the difficulties. They all approached the door behind which the crystal of the spirit of water lived, hoping to find out from it who was the real owner of this powerful creature that hid its secrets behind the walls of this ancient room. The hand reached out to the door, ready to open it, but despite all efforts, it remained motionless, as if the door itself was resisting, not wanting to reveal its secrets, hiding behind it something important and inaccessible to outsiders. Finally, with a soft creak, the door swung open, and a bright light burst forth from within, blinding in its radiance, as if the crystal of the water spirit itself was awakening, ready to share the truths that were stored within its depths. There, in the dark shadow of the ancient hall, the King of Spirits sat boredly on a stone, his eyes full of disappointment, because instead of his mistress, only fools had come, who could not appreciate the true value of this place and the power contained in this stone. The Duke, noticing the boy's depressed mood, tried to relieve the tension, and turned to the spirit with a request to show favor and tolerance, understanding how important it is to leave room for those who still strive to understand and know. The aristocrats, gathered in a circle, began to ask the spirit questions, trying to find out who in fact was the true heir of the owner of the crystal, because this secret was the key to unraveling the ancient power hidden behind the stone. the spirit interrupted the nobleman's speech. His voice became stronger and more confident, and he began to tell the story of the first owner of the stone, the one who opened the magical gates of water connecting the two worlds and granting the power that could change everything. When spirits were able to communicate freely with people, they entered into contracts with them, exchanging powers and knowledge, creating unique connections that enriched both worlds, strengthening their interconnection and harmonious existence. Those who made contracts with the Spirit King were called awakened, special people who possessed unique abilities and deep knowledge that opened up opportunities for them that were inaccessible to ordinary mortals. People and ghosts lived in harmony. Their relationship was strong and fruitful until one day a misfortune happened. One of the last spirits went mad, and the gates that connected the worlds were closed, leaving behind only emptiness and loss. Thunderion stopped in shock upon hearing about the Spirit Kings, his thoughts instantly returning to the prince he found in the basement. The same ghost that was connected to the Waterstone was there, and this discovery shook him to the core. It was known that the first owner of the Waterstone, like Liarte, could not awaken her power until she came of age, and this similarity in their fates made Thunderion's heart beat faster, as if a premonition of something important. The Duke, however, did not know this detail, and his face was distorted with shock when he learned that his hatred of his daughter was completely unfounded. She was innocent, and his prejudice prevented him from seeing the truth about her fate. The Spirit King, noticing the doubt in the people's eyes, grinned ominously, his eyes sparkling with cunning as they finally realized what they had lost. And perhaps this was only the beginning of the revelation of those secrets that had remained hidden for so long. The Spirit King, without hiding his contempt, pointed to the girl's velvet cloak, and with a poisonous grin called her companion nothing more than a shameless fake, as if his presence were only an extra burden on her path. The long-hidden secret has finally come to light. It turns out that Leonritius was the one who sucked all the power out of his mother, causing her death, and this left an indelible mark on his family, giving birth to a dark shadow. After this terrible youth was born, he became nothing but a hindrance to his sister, preventing her from developing completely absorbing attention and resources, leaving her in the shadow of his own actions and torments. Leonritius, overcome with rage, clenched his fists when he was forbidden to use water magic, and his heart filled with anger and despair, because this was the last thing that connected him to the ancient powers. Now that Liarte had left home, the water spirit had taken revenge by taking away the Elheim line's water magic, depriving them of that powerful gift, and the Elheim totem seemed to have become only a pitiful reflection of its former glory. The Duke, unable to believe the truth, began to laugh in madness, realizing that they had made a terrible mistake. They should have returned their daughter before it was too late, for now their family was left without power. The carriage rocked as it slowly passed through the streets, and the coachman, intently controlling the horse, continued on his way, oblivious to the world around him, while the city seemed unhurried, absorbed in its usual bustle. Liarte was dozing on the nobleman's shoulder, her body relaxed as if she were half asleep, when he gently woke her up quietly, saying that they had finally arrived, as if to gently bring her back to reality. The lady blinked slowly, gradually, waking up, and her gaze remained clouded, as if she still felt the soft embrace of sleep on her, unwilling to let go of its cozy shadow that so gently held her, not allowing her to return to reality. After that, trying to clear her thoughts, the beauty turned her gaze to the window, curiously trying to understand where exactly they had arrived, wanting to know in what corner of this big world their long and tiring journey had ended. It was the Duchy of Birch, a stately place with a large house, a mansion that rose above the green expanses that surrounded it, like a reflection of the stability and strength of the family to which they now belonged. Like a true gentleman, the man extended his hand to his lady, helping her carefully descend from the carriage. His movements were so smooth and confident that she felt completely safe under his caring gaze. On the street, they were met by a handsome adult man with bright red eyes similar to Birch's. It was the father of the lady's beloved. His name was Carmen. The man looked confident and friendly, greeting the guests with warmth. Mikhail quietly whispered into the sweet Liarte's ear that his father had long wanted to meet her, and now finally this moment had come, as if their whole history had come to this important turn where their paths crossed and began a new chapter. Liarte, slightly bowing her head, addressed the aristocrat with warmth and respect, thanking him for agreeing to receive her in his home. and her voice full of sincere gratitude reflected deep respect for his hospitality. But suddenly, her step was stopped by Mikhail, who with a slight smile noted that she shouldn't behave so formally and tensely because at this moment it was much more important to show sincerity and warmth than to observe conventions. The boy's father confirmed his son's words with a friendly smile, adding that the right words and actions are always appreciated, especially when they come from someone who truly understands what gratitude and respect mean. Giving the lady a kiss on the hand, he expressed his deepest gratitude for saving his child, saying that he could not find enough words to thank her for this priceless act that changed their destinies. The noblewoman, shaking her head slightly, did not agree with his words, stating that in fact it was the man's son who helped her by giving her a new home and providing security, because without his help, she would not have been able to start a new life. The nobleman's father could not help but notice how his son looked at the young lady with a deep, almost intimate gaze. And in this gaze, there was not only admiration, but also an unconscious desire to protect her, which was impossible to hide from those around him. Then, with a graceful movement of his hand, he invited the young couple into the house, inviting them to rest after their long and tiring journey, trying to create an atmosphere of comfort so that they could recuperate and feel completely comfortable. Liarte bowed her head in surprise when she heard herself called a benefactress, because these words seemed unexpected and excessively high for her modest actions, causing mixed feelings in her soul, misunderstanding, and slight embarrassment. For Liarte, where luxurious furniture and refined decor created an atmosphere of true comfort and peace, as if this corner was specially created for her rest and comfort. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door, and it was the servant whom Carmen had sent to the young lady to deliver an important message. His steps were quiet but confident, and his presence filled the room with a feeling of expectation. The door creaked open, and a bright light entered the space, enveloping the person entering, and then with grace, a stranger entered the room, bringing with him freshness and a slight sense of change. It was a beautiful maid, a maid with a soft and welcoming expression on her face, who introduced herself as Marilyn, confidently stating that from now on, she would take care of all of Liarte's needs, providing her with all the comfort she needed. In her past life, this maid was a brave warrior who fought hundreds of soldiers mercilessly and decisively, and her strength, bravery, and unwavering determination left an indelible mark in history as those who never retreated in the face of mortal danger. The maid, with a serious and confident expression, asked her mistress to take care of her, declaring that from now on, she would protect the noblewoman like a loyal guard ready to stand guard over her safety and eternal peace. Marilyn approached her lady with deep respect, slightly bowing her head, and in a soft but confident tone, informed her that her master had sent her here with a clear task: to take care of Liarte, protect her from any dangers, and fulfill her duty. The leaves rustled quietly, the bushes swayed gently in the light breeze, and bright light poured from the greenhouse windows, filling the space with a warm glow and creating an atmosphere of comfort, peace, and serenity, as if time had slowed down here. The aristocratic father and son were having tea. They were sitting at a large table with 3 chairs, and the atmosphere was filled with easy conversation and family comfort, despite the slight tension that hung in the air. Mikhail, like a faithful dog, patiently and with a devoted look, waited for the appearance of his beloved. The man's eyes reflected impatience and excitement, because each of her appearances filled his heart with great joy. The man sipped his tea, thought for a moment, and with a slight smile suddenly declared that there were rumors that raising children was a useless occupation, which caused slight bewilderment in his interlocutor, who could not immediately understand how seriously this was said. Without a trace of embarrassment, the young man stated that it seemed that his parent had not tried hard enough, and there was a frank irony in his voice that made his interlocutors freeze in surprise and think about the audacity of his words, as if he ignored all conventions. The men turned sharply at the noise coming from the other side, and their gazes instantly became tense, as if they anticipated something unexpected that could disrupt the usual course of their conversation and introduce uncertainty into the atmosphere. Liarte stood before them, dazzling and elegant, dressed in a new dress, the blue and white shades of which resembled a fresh flower. Her beauty attracted all eyes, and her every step, like a dance, was filled with grace and charm. The noblewoman, with a slight bow and a soft look, asked forgiveness for being late, her voice sounding sincere and humble, as if she felt that even a minor delay required an explanation, and sought to smooth over any possible discontent. The head of the Birch family warmly invited the lady to sit at their table. His gesture was full of friendliness and hospitality, as if he wanted to create an atmosphere of comfort and respect where everyone would feel like an important part of this event. The aristocrats drank tea in the greenhouse, where the air was filled with the fragrance of flowers, and the maid standing nearby readily awaited any order, creating an atmosphere of refined tranquility and majestic solitude. The aristocrat, with obvious surprise, stopped in front of the table, unable to hide her admiration, looking at the many exquisite treats that were in front of her, as if this table was a true symbol of boundless hospitality and care for each guest. The desserts looked especially appetizing. Golden baked cakes decorated with cream beckoned with their appearance, promising an unearthly taste, and made you forget about all your worries for a moment of pleasure. Noticing that the beauty had not touched her food, Mikkel, with slight surprise, asked if she really didn't like the food, his voice sounding soft, but with a hint of concern, as if he himself was worried about her discomfort. The beauty, somewhat awkwardly, and with a slight blush on her cheeks, admitted that she had never seen such dishes, and therefore did not know how to eat them properly. Her words sounded sincere, and timidity was visible in her gaze. The men, stunned by her confession, froze in their chairs, unable to believe that the lady had never tasted sweets in her life, and their surprise was so strong that they could not immediately find the words to respond. Sympathy was easily reflected on Mr. Birch's face. His gaze was full of sadness and longing, as if he was worried about his beloved, and for a moment his heart sank, sharpening with deep inner pain and anxiety. However, hiding his sadness, he quickly changed his facial expression to a warm and friendly smile, promising the lady his full support, assuring her that he would always be there, ready to come to the rescue at any moment. First, he pointed his fork at the strawberry roll, which looked soft and delicious, its sweet aroma filling the air, as if inviting her to enjoy this treat. And he said with a smile that this delicacy was worth trying. Trying to offer her something tasty, Mikhail held out a piece of dessert on the cutlery, with a soft smile asking the lady to open her mouth and taste this delicacy. His voice was soft and a little playful, as always when he wanted to please her. The nobles smiled with interest and slight surprise as they watched the girl actually enjoy the sweetness, their gazes filled with approval, as if this moment had become a sign of her acceptance and comfort for them. Liarte smiled happily, her eyes shining with pleasure. She felt her heart filling with comfort and warmth, as if she had finally found a place where she was appreciated and where she could be herself. The evening sky was bathed in soft light, and from the windows on either side, golden light poured in as if moonlight was refracted in the glass, casting shadows, creating an atmosphere of mystical silence in the air, broken only by the crackling of the fire in the fireplace. The lady walking along the luxurious marble corridor walked confidently, accompanied by her maid, her gaze directed at the window where the twilight was just beginning to subside, and in her head were thoughts about the past day, full of important events that left a mark on her soul. Suddenly, in the midst of this silence, a piercing cry was heard, from which the noblewoman's heart sank and her body tensed, as if ready to react, and she instinctively turned around, trying to understand where this sound came from, which disturbed her peace. She turned back sharply, trying to figure out where the scream was coming from, but there was only emptiness before her eyes, and the silence seemed to swallow everything around, leaving only an uneasy feeling of ambiguity and uncertainty. Looking around in confusion, Liarte decided that perhaps she had only imagined it, and that it was nothing more than a figment of her imagination. But at that moment, her heart still remained gripped by an incomprehensible anxiety, as if something was wrong. However, the cry was repeated, shrill and alarming, causing the maid to ask her mistress why she had suddenly stopped, as if she had not heard this eerie sound that disturbed the silence of the night and awakened hidden fears. The maid, not hearing anything that was troubling the lady, confidently stated that there were no loud sounds, unlike her mistress, who clearly distinguished the cries of some kind of animal, perhaps occurring somewhere in the distance. The young maid, supporting her mistress by the waist, suggested that she go to her chambers to rest and relax after such a long and stressful day, as if understanding that Liarte needed time for herself to regain her strength. Liarte had no choice but to nod in response and lower her head, agreeing to the proposal, because the fatigue from daily worries and experiences overcame her, and peace and rest seemed necessary at this moment. Together with the maid, they continued their journey along the long, dark corridor where the candlelight barely touched the walls and the shadows played on the stone slabs as if hiding everything that was hidden in their depths, and the air was saturated with the cold of the night. But the screams did not stop growing louder and more frequent, like the sounds of wild nature pursuing their steps, and each new cry filled Liarte's heart with more and more anxiety, making her nervous and feeling that something terrible was about to happen. Carmen sat in his office late at night, reading documents, and fatigue, like a heavy weight pressed on his shoulders. He stared at the mountain of papers, and thoughts consumed by anxiety hovered in his head like persistent shadows. The butler stood nearby quietly, awaiting orders, when the aristocrat, wearily speaking the words out loud, began to read out a letter that seemed to contain nothing but complaints and grievances, devoid of any hope for constructive dialogue. In the letter, the nobles demanded that Liarte return to her duchy, and with every word, Carmen's voice grew more and more irritated. It was too much. His resolve had finally been challenged, and demanding Liarte's return was only the last straw. The butler accepted the master's words with unconditional consent, claiming that the crown prince, as well as the entire imperial family, sincerely sought the downfall of the powerful Birch family, which in their opinion had become inevitable and necessary for the preservation of their power. With a slight smile, Carmen watched as the prince seemed to suddenly change his plans, and now his desire to marry Liarte became clear. This decision turned out to be quite intriguing, making everyone around guess what was behind such a move. It was a completely absurd delusion. After being treated so cruelly in the past, she could not even think about returning to the place where she had to endure such humiliating and painful moments, leaving them in the past forever. The letter, full of complaints and absurd demands, was thrown into the trash without hesitation, as not worth even the slightest attention, because it contained nothing but empty words and useless threats. The butler bowed with deep respect to his master, having received clear orders to no longer accept letters from aristocrats